Records. Start the streaminating. Alright, and we are back for part 2 of today, March the 7th live stream, conducting our research and development on our product suite of products. And we are working our ways up, ladies and gentlemen. Working our way up.
If I recall correctly,
What do you recall correctly? Let's post that. Let's post the new chat. It's probably the exact same thumbnail. Is it because there's the Google Docs? Maybe, I don't know. I don't think so. Docs link. DVD. To be disclosed. Yeah, so we're just here partaking in the feast economy, which is what it's all about.
we think.
Ever since humans figured out how to
Make drugs.
produce mass quantities of drugs reliably.
Yeah.
And then they got very possessive over that, and of course society bifurcated into class structures and subjugated tribes, and it's all uphill from there.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly the topic of the discussion of today. Where were we? So we went through the card diagram, the stacking,
Yeah. The
making stacks.
the nuance of it's not just the complex adaptive system. There's the grammatical stuff. There's the
Right.
capacity stuff that
How
has to be
to
involved.
make complex adaptive systems, how to model them
Yeah.
hyperstitionally.
Yeah, and then the reverberation back into how all of these structures are actually very similar and parallel to the quantum universe, as it were. Not
Right.
is the quantum universe, but is a very the quantum universe can basically be modeled by this description. That's kind of where it's at. It provides the language and the same
Right.
underlying
Yeah.
utilities, tools to build up a universe that behaves according to the observations. It provides the same language. It
Yep.
provides the same.
So if you're familiar with quantum mechanics, this model, or this can be extended into like the idea of when something exists, that's like it's popping up from the wave. Sort of the wave, the sea of carriers is the wave, and then something pops up, and then it's there.
Right, and then that something can then shoot quote unquote artifacts or messages, if you will, which is like the parallel with the photons being exchanged between the, electrons, protons,
Right.
whatever. That's how they know about each other and all that shit.
Yeah. So the particle goes on to partake in wave-like functions
Mhm.
later on with other interactions.
Right, and it kind of resonates into its carriers and all of that stuff.
Yep.
So
Uh-huh.
a huge relationship happens in this description and that description. Clearly, this one is not a mathematical one, but rather the philosophical underline of like this is how you should think of these objects. So. And if you think of particles as those objects, it seems to work. I mean, sure, I might be missing on my math a little bit here, but I'm sure smarter people than I would point out what that is. As far as I can tell, the types of subjects being touched are not really controversial.
Uh-huh. Cool. Just seeing if I could figure out why the thumbnail comes up as the old meeting, which is interesting because you can see my shirt is not the same shirt.
And my hair is slightly better, although slightly worse.
Ha ha. And here we are. Do-do-do-do-do-do. My shirt is super saturated.
Nice.
Super saturated. I know it's not quite the same, but cool. Sweet. Yep. Putting the monitor up.
We're just full of ourselves.
Full of crazy things. Alright. Nice. Yeah. So we wanted to get into a couple questions or things that were discussed. We can probably kind of go over the week a little bit, but there was two topics of discussion that came up.
Yeah.
Do you recall them?
So Ian was talking about consumption and creation. And I basically asked him if models speak can somehow help illuminate the discussion that he's trying to make to materialize.
I think he was talking about like what, how do you like facilitate creativity, or something like that. I caught a bit of the discussion.
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure how far into this I went in chat.
And it's sort of like powers and capacities reminds me of.
So the idea behind my thinking is basically that of a battery. Like you accumulate the energy that is fed to you up until a certain point where you need to
you need the consumption part.
You need to sort of let it out again, and so one of the reasons why we would want to start from the whole Polyverse description is because that sets up the stage for this mechanism where, with that whole parallel of quantum particles shooting messages at each other, photons or whatever, leaving the particle charged up or whatnot, is very much similar to this, where messages get sent into these stacks, and stacks interpret the messages, and it causes shifts within their internal structures and whatnot. And then eventually there's a sort of an accumulation of potential energy, so to speak, from all of these activities that need to dissipate back out into the world in terms of its own activities in the environment. And so the analogy is basically that of energy transformations, where individual stacks get charged up by their environment through being present on the carriers that feed them the energy, and then past a certain point, that energy needs to dissipate back out of the system, and actions are created on the environment by the stack, and the cycle continues. So, in terms of creativity and consumption, I think that basic underlying mechanism sort of illustrates it. The rest can probably be summed up as its commodification, taking that activity and then classifying it arbitrarily into various abstractions, and then attempting to extract and secondary flow of energy out of that commodification process. So instead of charging up people to do an actual activity, you charge up people artificially. For example, money would be currency would be a way to give incentive, so to speak, or a carrot on a stick, if you will. You do that artificially. You accumulate it through an artificial desire, and then you allow that to dissipate onto the environment by having this person perform the actions for the money or whatnot. So that's the gist of how that could be um, utilized by a market system. So it's not immune to it by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that's the that's the trick of that trade. It's to utilize this fact and divert it into um, activities that are otherwise not um, fundamental to the structure.
Yeah, I wasn't. I didn't really catch that conversation. I'm not really sure what the objective is exactly.
Oh, that we didn't go deeply into the objective. This is as much as we covered, really. Consumption and creation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just kind of thinking like, cool, we're back. Part two
Yep.
here of today. We just took like whatever the old like 45-minute half-hour break, and
Sustenance is important.
continuing on. Yep. There. I mean, yeah. We kind of want to get up like. It's nice to have like real-time interaction and all that with the chat. Which I was thinking like we could get a way bigger chat, but it's like, what's your audience? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't really want to
We've
have a whole
expanded-
bunch of confused people asking weird, like,
Unrelated questions.
yeah, just not going to lead us
We've already expanded out like that before.
to the best places. But yeah, so there was one other thing that came up. So, but to me, creativity and how to facilitate that can be expressed in model terms using, I think, like power and capacity of carriers. In that we have all these different media that we can play with in the world around us. We have the body to do things everywhere, and we can learn the language of different roles, essentially, right? So we learn a new language that kind of opens up the creative aspect of possibility and potential in our mind that we know, and so there's more things to play with when you want an agent to connect different media together and create neat resonances and stuff. The more different languages you learn, just the more kind of nuanced and neat stuff you can do.
Yeah,
Right.
especially on the various, especially when you start to jump layers and have languages that integrate layers amongst each other and things like that, which is really the source of most of the complexity in a grammatical capacity.
Yeah. And even having access to the types of materials that can allow you to bootstrap into new media. Like, just thinking about modern day, nobody needs to know how to do anything. You can Google it for the instructions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this gives you access to so many different kind of worlds or whatever. Which that kind of leads into the card game and all that, because we're looking to have a sort of a database, a guild database.
Yeah, to bring that back together onto the fold of the same similarities that we're bringing from the bottom, so to speak, up already.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I think the actual manual for it needs to follow on the footsteps of the field manual, which would render it, which would be its own abstraction. Yeah.
Pausing. defines. Cool. So where were we? Creativity. Inputs, outputs.
Creativity and consumption was the topic for Eon.
Right.
Then we discussed the fact of complexity, basically.
There's also a loop built into that, because the only way you'll ever be able to consume or continue consuming is if you create the opportunities for that to happen.
Right. Well,
So creativity has to be, in other words, is constrained to consumption in some aspects. Kind of grounds the enterprise, if you will. I mean, it's not just doing art or doing downtime.
No.
You know, I'm doing leisure time right now. Even any job and anything, it pulls on your capacities to make things happen, right? To satisfy constraints and all that. Anyways, we can get probably put together more clear questions if things come up throughout the week or
Yeah.
whatever.
The only other clarification point was the whole decoding and coding, the coding thing, and how that relates to.
Car diagram.
Yeah. So on the one hand side, we have all of these carriers, and we have all these messages, and we have all these agents. Coding and coding, decoding, all of that stuff is what they do to translate one layer to another layer, so that it can be packaged up and carried over a carrier that is agnostic to the message itself, and then unpacked in a different layer
Right.
again.
So this is how you have the agents coming together and clustering to get things done.
Yeah.
And it kind of pulls from a higher layer, falls through these stacks of agents which are doing something that ends up causing a communication to happen, and then you decode it, come up the stack, and then you have potential communication.
Right, and a resonance is when that message has had an effect, an active effect on the secondary stack that is in question, that the messages were sent to. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the main thing. Like, so
there's the difference between encoding and decoding versus what?
versus emission and absorption. So the
Yeah.
emission and absorption part is like where that fiat arrow is happening. That's sort of like the particle, if you will, that gets transposed though.
Right. So you're talking more cross-stack communication.
Yeah. So that's where the
And so even within when you're going down an encoding stack or whatever, you could say that there's also virtual fiat emissions and absorptions happening on a parallel way. They're communicating peer to peer. These agent stacks.
We'll
Yeah.
throw something down the layers
So
so that another agent stack can pick it up. And by,
So
by
there's
having
like
it pick it up, it's going to
two dimensions to this. The only reason that a specific agent is encoding something and then passing it down the layers is so that its peer agent on the other stack can receive decode it, and then
act on it.
understand what it is and pass it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two dimensions happening.
So that would be the main difference between emission and absorption, which is happening at that fiat line over up at the top, versus encoding and decoding, which is part of the underlying mechanism, which goes down through the stack, finds a carrier that has a common agent between the two carriers of interest, takes the expressions transforms them onto the proper carrier, and then has that coding climb right back up to the top, where it's going to be recognized as a part and parcel of an existing protocol that is already operating on that layer. So you can intercept the signals and work with them. And that interception and working with those signals becomes a resonance situation. The two agents then can be said to be isomorphic due to that resonance, and the agent producing the resonance effect is said to be causing fiat resonance in the secondary agent, as in because they are the causing the resonation to happen within the other agent. They are injecting it into that process, and that's the fiat.
Cool. Yeah. So I think we've gone over this chart pretty well. It seems like that we've got this kind of big picture polyverse of how we are modeling things, and using this kind of holonic stacking. That's our playground, basically. Yep. That's what we're working with.
Yep. That's the ontological matrix, if you will, of our design.
And so any kind of product which we're developing has to speak this language if we want it to be proper, isomorphic, and all this.
And not just be yet another product.
Yeah, rising to the challenge of the day, basically, in which so many systems are built.
So this actually points out why we've been struggling so much with identifying what it would be, because of all of these constraints that are going into what it can be and what it cannot be. It having to recognize this language means that hashing out this language is pretty much has to come alongside that, and this is sort of what caused the delay.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, as they say.
High five.
Nice hyperstation.
The most unexcited high five ever in the history of man.
Well, that was just to make it hyperstation.
It's just dispassionate. That's all it is. You know, unattached.
Tell my wife I said hello.
That's the one. With your enemy, you know where they stand, but with their filthy neutrals.
Yeah. Filthy neutrals. Yeah, so we want to extend this model into some products, some of them software, some of them basically this card game idea. And this is what we're using to build worlds. We're building organization. It's like if you were whatever, like your plane goes down, you're in an island, you got a bunch of people, there's no central authority to go to or whatever. And this is just an example of the so many, like, you've got a community with a problem, and once again, as usual, the government doesn't seem to care unless you get the bureaucracy rolling, and it's like takes so long to get things happening, if at all, if ever, and a total reliance on that commodification process, like the mediation, to everything should be solved as a service. That can be a huge problem, as we see that basically everything decays and nothing gets solved, right? Because nobody's actually doing it. So how to organize people together? Well, you need to have a proper model, otherwise the whole thing falls apart right from the very start, right? So if you have a proper model, it can flow between people, between peers, correctly.
It's like having a common language. It's like having a common culture. It's like having a common understanding of idioms. All of this all of these commonalities is what makes any group really function, because the group does not really function on anything explicit, not in nature anyway. It's been It's the
Right.
case study after case study. It has to do with the fact that it's the unsaid elements of
Right.
communication that actually drive the said aspect of the meaning of the said aspects of communication. The words sort of like only touch superficial aspects. They're
Right.
memes basically.
There's
They
like the
touch,
word number dichotomy too.
yeah, they touch only on these little tiny connotational aspects of a myth that you already would know, and that myth is what gives the meaning to the words that you're hearing, and placing them together automatically
Right.
into an actual story that you're hearing.
Yeah, but it's just like an archetype framework. It has no meaning until it's actually
It plugged into something, yeah.
comes into the world hyperstitionally. And so having a model that can capture potentiality is extremely important, because most models you find anywhere, anybody doing anything, it's always going to be like hooked into this systemic, rationalistic way of thinking where it's like everything's a computer program, but it's not really.
And it's risk minimizing and all of that stuff, which
Right.
causes it to actually neglect a lot of potential.
Right. Yeah, it tries to create this perfect environment in the world, which is so perfect just like the mind thinks, right? So we need a model that's completely open to potentiality, that describes things without limiting them, right?
Right.
Are you
But-
getting nervous again?
It's just distracted.
Yawning for unknown reasons, causing our poor spectators to yawn.
What do you call it? It's an anxiety response.
Maybe.
No, I know it is. I just don't know what is the anxiety. I think it's just normal.
Yeah.
The normal
Well, it's
condition right now.
for me, like, it's totally the I guess the unknown, that like I can feel like when I'm driving towards this model, towards the game and all that, it's so freaking ambiguous. How do you even start? Like, okay, let's play a game right now, but there's like so many types of games that you can play, right? And what is the first card you're going to put down? What is the first thing you're going to describe, right? And it's like this whole thing, like, how do you even begin? Like, I've began so many times. I've made so many decks, so many like collections of cards which describe worlds or whatever, and
Well, I think this is where the temperaments actually can be helpful, because I did not have that problem. And I think the
Right.
difference is because if you look at that eye diagram, you'll notice something peculiar. Yeah, pull it up. for sure.
pull it up.
Yeah, you just scroll
Let's
past it.
see.
There it is. So,
Yeah.
if you look at it, so look at it from the perspective of starting from the pragmatic.
Yeah.
You there yet?
We're there yet.
Follow the arrow upwards.
Pragmatic.
Follow the arrow upwards.
Yeah.
Follow the arrow sideways.
Too devotional.
Follow the arrow downwards.
Straight back.
Follow the arrow sideways.
Yeah, it's a circle. A loop.
So what's happening?
Loops back into itself.
So, what did you describe? Having to start over and over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
So you don't get the same problem
Yeah.
with academic.
When you're
You-
stepping back into even more abstract.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't get that problem happening for quite a long time.
Because you're saying, oh, look, it loops over and over and over.
And at the same time, it allows you to explore all the other ones before you ever loop back. And so the starting point perhaps isn't in the pragmatic sphere or the devotional one, and perhaps it cannot be, because they are only dealing with the concrete aspects of the model themselves.
Yes. Yes. So you do need I agree, I think probably an entry point, so to speak, an encompassing entry point.
Yeah,
An
which
entry
would
point
probably
that-
be academic rather than pragmatic.
Or,
it's probably
or
gonna
perceptive.
Potentially, but perceptive is going to have to rely on the bits and pieces provided to it by academic, which is exactly what happened with the original cycle. Right? We couldn't build perceptive without having the Lego pieces to build it from. That was really the key. Like, Portal Mountain's infrastructure, for example, is reliant on these temperaments, which are coming from the academic side of the exposition. Right? Like
Well,
the four peripheral spots are these.
yeah, but I think that, so obviously academic and perceptive are heavily reflective of each other, and the way that I've seen it is that perceptive can become aware of the dynamic between pragmatic and devotional.
Yep.
The dynamic that's happening, they'll feel it and they'll know that
But the dynamic is described here.
they will get the feeling that nothing is so solid as you think it is, and that the world is alive,
Well, yeah.
basically.
But this is also the diamond way, if you will. So, the diamond way has a problem in the sense that it's extremely difficult to get right, and if you don't, you're really gonna fuck up.
Yeah.
So, the perceptive side is actually very volatile in that sense. This is why the academic
Yeah.
side is what's used to glue it
Yeah,
together.
no doubt. And so if you wanted to use like a structured approach, it's not going to be easy.
No.
It wouldn't be simple.
So my suggestion would then be to hop out into my sphere of approach,
Okay.
and
And which
build
we've
up some
done.
Lego
Like we've
pieces.
already been here. We've been here. The Lego pieces are. So remember the carrier nesting of the fundamental guilds, where you nest the the membership into the natural, into the proximal,
Mhm.
right? Guilds.
Becomes the triad, yeah.
Right. So, in other words, this loop that goes back and forth between pragmatic and devotional, one of the first things that it's going to try and describe is that, oh wait, we have to pull academic in with us. So we have to, in other words, we have to pull membership. And what does it mean to be a member? That's one of the first things we pull in. And I have decks for that. I have decks for it.
Yeah.
There's a deck
so
for
we
that.
we have a starting point.
We've
then.
got it. But
Okay.
it's like,
So it still comes back to so only when you come back to that starting point that it seems to unfold.
yeah, in other words, like that's probably one of the first cards that you would lay down is membership or whatever, and you can unfold that.
We're a
fractal if
member
you want.
of this participatory function, yeah.
Right.
So perhaps the first step in every card game is to give everybody a card. You are a member in this.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a mind map. The tabletop is a mind mapping space.
And you start to map who's at the space.
And
And then you map why they're there.
You want to have like a membership list, sort of.
And then you want to map why they're there. And then you want to map what the role of everybody is in relation to why they're there in the first place. So that just gets down the bearings of what's there. Right? And once you have those Lego pieces, you can start to say, okay, well, how does the model apply to that situation?
Right.
So I think that would be that's actually literally repeating the guild dynamics infrastructure on the
Excuse me?
table that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Cool.
that's where it comes from.
Did you want to
It's-
maybe give it a shot? I don't know if I have cards with me, but we can like try to lay some things down and just talk about it or whatever.
Here's me. Here's you.
Okay, we're gonna need more napkins.
No, napkins is just us.
Fine.
Here's the problem. Here's the goal.
Good. I'm glad that nobody can see that. Do you want to take a break though? We'll just,
Oh,
Be right
are
back.
we actually blocking this?
Yeah.
Um, we can if you want.
Might as
I'd
well.
have to make a phone call though.
Fine. Do whatever you want on your break, yo. It's break time. Be right backs. So we're bringing it back.
All right, guys.
Bringing it back.
So we just left off trying to demonstrate or trying to think through, finally, what a real card game is going to start to look like based on everything we've presented so far. This is mine or yours?
They're both yours. Yeah, so in other words, we've kind of exhausted the academic side of things.
Yeah, the Lego pieces are all in place now, except for maybe some of the heuristics, because it's only now that comes to light where we decided to take on the approach of actually building out the guild dynamics through the card game itself. So this should be interesting.
Yeah. So we did introduce these booklets not too long ago. You may recall. So, first off, there's media protocol. So what we're doing when we mind mapping is involves writing thoughts and ideas out into medium so that it reflects your thoughts.
Right, so there's a correlation between the two.
So it doesn't have to be a card. In this case, it's a booklet. So this is booklet protocol would involve instructions for making these types of booklets, right? And so this is 5 sheets of paper, 3 staples, right?
Simple.
That's what it is. And what these were put together for was to describe roles. So this is another thing. So we were talking about agents before.
Yep.
And an agent takes care, or you could say a collection of protocols, as we mentioned before. It takes care of manipulating a certain medium, right? Or carrier.
So an agent, the simplest definition for an agent in the schema would be in receiving signals from certain carriers, and then having that be a cause of reaction to send signals on other carriers, potentially the same carriers, but but the point being is that signals hit a membrane, black magic happens, signals come out of the membrane. So that
black box,
that quote unquote black magic is what we refer to as an agent, and internally it's a set of protocols that are responsive to these different signals across the carriers that it's on.
Right. So the case where an agent is, say, receiving signals and then putting.
By the way, an agent is not necessarily an intelligent agent. It's simply a thing that sits on these carriers and responds to them. So it's like a programming a mechanism.
Right. So one of the difficulties when trying to catalog all of this stuff that's needed to actually have a game exist, one of the problems is how do you delimit or create a space, a domain of behavior, and say that's delimited by this particular role, right? So because roles can become very it's arbitrary essentially. One way a person defines a certain role may be different from another way some other person defines a role. They may include this activity, where you may say, oh no, that activity is part of this role, which is different.
Yeah,
right?
So the name to function is never actually a match.
We all have our own idea of how this matches up, and so this is my database, right? The way that I see this is not the way that Genya would put it together or that someone else would put it together. However, we expect convergence.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that this is being laid out is that one agent or one role per carrier or per medium. So per a domain of behavior where there's a certain language happening and certain grammar has to happen for that domain to happen properly, that's what's being encompassed in a single booklet here.
So you could call this particular agency an authority on that domain.
Sure.
So that
Good.
that would be our definition of authority in this case. It would be a much more technical
Right.
delimitation of what that is, rather than there's an authority over you.
Right, and so later on we could come together and say we've got the player's role and the hero's role, and we could say, okay, we want some interaction to happen across them. Then there's a virtual agent kind of appearing, taking care of that
Right.
altogether. But we want a way that atomizes the role into this booklet is about this role, this booklet is about that role, because this is how you get things entered into a database.
Yeah, it's a way to get some kind of naming scheme into it, some kind of a mythology, if you will, into how these things combine together.
Yeah.
So if we recall previous conversations, really stress that words, language, and mythology are all sort of codependently arisen. You don't have words that are outside of the context of some kind of narrative to begin with, so you don't really
Right.
so don't really arise in a vacuum like that. You always have a story that that they're supposed to express, and so words gain their meaning through the mythologies that are involved in the culture, rather than being a technical construct created by a dictionary process.
Right. It's all in context.
Yeah. So the point being about these roles actually is that they are these booklets are pertaining to, as Brian was saying, his mythology. And
Yeah.
mythology being not like you know, you don't. I'm not talking about like Norse mythology or ancient Greece or whatever. Mythology is just a narrative that is used to function day-to-day life. It's like what you make of things, what you believe things to be. So it's a much more
Right.
not granular, much more
It kind of
down-to-earth mythology.
builds the world in which you're interacting.
Yeah, and we use the word mythology simply because I like to step on people's toes a little, and B, it's because there's no actual better descriptive word for what that is. A story which you take to be real life. That is how it used to be evoked. That is still how it's evoked, except nobody thinks their mythology, because nobody calls it mythology until
Right.
it phases out of favor for a different perspective.
Right, and part of the point of that is, I guess, that we don't think our worldview as mythology, because we believe it so much that it is our world, right?
Yeah.
And that's what mythology is.
Yeah, so we're
It
making
is
the
doing
point
that.
that is actually what mythology is.
Yeah.
And to try to sort of escape out of that idea is A, not necessary, B, counterproductive.
It just is what is.
Yeah,
It's been happening for a long time. This is how people organize themselves.
And furthermore, there's actually nothing wrong with that. The symptoms of our inability to organize it effectively are not comments on the merit of it.
What this comes down to for me is uncertainty, and the fact that people are so certain in a superstitious way about scientism and all this modern progress and everything, the whole worldview, that they can't imagine that it's not real, right?
Well,
And
it's not
that's
that
a
they're-
folly.
It's not that they're certain. It's not that they have a reaction to uncertainty that reinforces these narratives, which create the illusion of more certainty. But these certainties never actually line up, and so uncertainty rears its ugly head over and over and over again. But instead of falling away from the narrative, it reinforces itself by doubling down and doubling down and doubling down and trying to control all these uncertain
Yeah, and
aspects.
it's not that it's not real. It's just that we should realize that we are constructing models in our head of the world, and those models are not reality itself. Period. But yet we think we make this.
They're sufficient
We
to
make this
navigate.
equation that's equal. What's in my head is equal to what's out there, and that's incorrect because of uncertainty.
Yeah, it used to not matter as much when the mythology and everyday life matched to matched to be the same thing. Where the mythology is about, collecting your resources and consuming your resources, finding shelter, and finding a community and all of that kind of stuff, avoiding dangers, all that jazz. When the mythology is limited to these activities, they just go hand in hand. But when the mythology escapes into some abstract realm, talking about unattainable places and abstract spaces, if you will, all of that becomes moot and besides the point of everyday life, and it could take on essentially a life of its own as it has. Back to the books.
Back to the books. So we will obviously very easily get derailed. So let's come back to this. And do our yawning and whatnot, because it's so insane. First off, so mind mapping. That's what we're doing, is mind mapping. We're having ideas in our head. When we express and when we talk and communicate, we are mind mapping right now.
Yeah.
I just said that we are mind mapping right now. That was a blurb that went out into space and got interpreted. And it's also supposed to be what's in my mind, that we are mind mapping right now. And I just said that we are doing it. There's an isomorphism between sound and what's in my head, right? So that's the basic.
And the responses that you'll get from me, for example, are going to now be under that same language umbrella, if you will. Like now that you've established we're doing mind mapping, the next idea I will come up with will be in relation to said mind mapping and what it's about, like I am talking right now.
Yeah.
And therefore the next interpretation, due to the injection of this idea, it becomes about that. And so the seed's been planted, if you will,
right.
and now we're
that
conceptually growing
right.
the structure that we're
exactly
talking about.
Through hyperstition. So that the hyperstitious model being projected out has now established that we are mind mapping, and now we're talking about mind mapping, and we are doing mind mapping.
Yeah, lots of mind mapping.
So I think what's one of the things, I just want to stop a roadblock for most people. When you are thinking about mind mapping, one thing that may stop you is that, am I doing it right? Okay, so first rule of the game basically is related to coherence. And that is, if you have an idea and you want to write it down, to remember it later or to share it, mind map it. In however form of symbol it comes down onto the paper or whatever, or into the sound, into words.
Yeah.
That's what you do. You work with what you've got, and then you process it later. You take that artifact and you say, can I write this better? Or if you learn how to do the game better, you make it better.
So instead of asking yourself, did what I output is what I output correct? The process is simply to output something and then use that to see how correct it is, and based on that modify it ever so slightly. So it's giving you feedback now, how correct it is. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether what you're going to output initially is correct. What matters is that you output it to begin with, and then you can see, it will tell you whether it is or isn't, and there you can take it from there and modify it back shape it into the different corrections.
It should be an ongoing,
that the environment is demanding of it.
An ongoing type of thing. So what I'm going to do here is maybe neat to potentially to watch. So I'm going to call this out audibly first, that I'm using deck media protocol right now to arrange this media, this is paper media, into a different format. So this would be one step to creating a booklet. If you go like this and fold it again the other way, now we take our skizzers.
And voila, a different medium.
Now we have a different medium.
Now, all of this is obviously quite trivial when we're not bringing it into the context of the discussion of the model itself, because obviously we all know how to write things down and whatnot. But the problem we are really addressing here is not the fact that we can write things down, but when we come across a particular problem domain, we're always stuck reinventing a wheel of how to address this problem, and we're always sort of retackling problems over and over and over and over again without ever really tackling the problem of how do we keep the solutions perpetual with ourselves. Conversely, there's another force at work here that is essentially trying to eliminate perpetual solutions as hard as it can for the purpose of making a buck. So those two forces need to be addressed. This is actually one of the reasons why this isn't as common knowledge as one might think, despite the fact that this seems to be almost excessively trivial.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of separating cards into, like their subject matter and addressing a problem based on individual elements of it and whatnot, and taking the perspective of an ego-less perspective on it, on how these kinds of things can be resolved, are not really common knowledge anymore. So as trivial as
Yep.
it seems, these first steps are the ones that are fundamentally missing in our ability to
Mm-hmm.
learn from ourselves.
And technology changes too. The contexts all change, so things have to be continually brought up to date, so that it's understood.
Without the elimination of the old ways, part of the other reason that we are having this issue is because we keep eliminating old mediums and old ways of doing things, despite the fact that they don't actually have anything wrong with them, aside from the fact that they're not new.
Right. Well, like for the example, to put together books in terms of like hymns and songs and rhymes to remember over generations. Like we don't need to do that right now.
Or
It's
even
inefficient.
forget the books, memorize.
But then so that turned into books. But then, so when it turned into books, did it forget something? Was something lost from that old way of oral tradition?
Well, absolutely.
Then that's what you got to watch for.
Well, yeah,
sure.
of course. With the books, it's pretty easy to assert that variances get eliminated, right? When something is written down on a piece of paper, you're just following the same program over and over again. You don't really vary away from it. But when it's an oral tradition, you can take the formula and you basically make it alive, and each performance, if you will, is always going to be unique.
Right, and that's kind of a danger of having a book and saying the book never changes. This is what it is. It'll always be that. But then culture is changing, and the meaning of words is changing all around it. But the old artifact is losing significance.
Yeah.
Right.
Bible.
Well, that's the danger that we have to be aware of, right?
Yeah.
So here we have, before this card even existed, this card describes what I just did here, right? So there's a loop in that. So this is deck media index card protocol. This is filed under that. This is a heuristic if you need an index card, cut up an 8.5 by 11 sheet. Now
So
you've
we've
got
both done what we said we were going to do, and we've recorded that we were doing it. So there's a matching structure going on.
recorded
again,
the protocol to describe it.
Again, this all sounds really, really trivial, but the idea of having the structure encoded into the content itself is what allows both to be give each other feedback in a way that lets you know whether what you're doing is on the right trajectory or not.
Right.
When they start to disagree with each other, that means that there's something fundamentally flawed in the way they're resonating, in the way the whole structure is resonating with the environment that it's in.
Right, and these instructions will always shift and morph and become better and better. This is just, I just
Yeah.
wrote that very quickly.
Some more than others. Like for instance, this detail might change, right? The cutting up of the cards might change, but the premise of why you're doing it in the first place will not.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of an abstract core underlying the principle here.
Right. So, I have a stack of books here describing describing this in terms of a game, mind mapping in terms of a game. And why would you do it? Why would you mind map as a game? So this is why I started with the Players Guild book, right? And so the reason why I did a booklet format is because I knew I was going to write a whole bunch of things kind of relating to each other, just kind of fleshing out what's going on here with this, and to remind myself, so a player deals with coherence, which is skill, and then affect, I guess, which is your feeling, how you feel about what happened. Like if you did well at the game, you feel good.
Yeah,
If you did
reward, punishment.
bad at the game, yeah, reward, punishment. This is the essence of a game, and so we have degrees of coherence here, and that goes up. And so this coherence is a factor or dimension of every single role. So you've got a player role, you've got a hero role, you've got a facilitator role. Right? It's not coming through perfect, but facilitator role. So your coherence increases, you will feel better because the models you project out on the world are going to have more effect. You'll be able to help people flock behaviors together. You'll be able to help organize groups. As a facilitator, your skill goes up. You gain more rewards. So at the very bottom of this stack, we have something that's always happening, which is that players are being rewarded for skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
It's always there.
So as you climb the stack, nothing really changes. It's just added and added and added more, and
Right.
that's really what coherence is like. It's not about, changing something into something else, but rather working with what you have in order for it to become more and more and more in line with its own environment.
So I think we should pull up another chart, and that's the model schema, because I want to get into that, and I know that this would start to cause me even to yawn, out of pure horror of anxiety.
It's not
Wherever it
related
went.
to this.
Okay, fine. Where did you go?
Are you looking for our brain?
Here's one. No, this one.
Okay.
So this is like, okay, I have some index cards and I want to play the game. And then you ask yourself, like, okay, what do I do? What do I write down? What do I put? And, well, that completely depends on your context. Why are you doing the game? So the point of this is organizing your own behavior, so you're flocking with yourself, sort of. You're increasing coherence. You're creating a mind map, and then fine-tuning that mind map and helping yourself to understand the world. And again, like Players Guild, the higher skill you get, the more reward you get. Things make more sense. You project. Reality comes back and says, wow, you did great.
And like any game, once the skill starts to rise, you are in a situation where you kind of start to where it becomes effortless, and more effortless.
Yes, that is.
And so what looks like a lot of very, very difficult is now becoming a natural extension of the participant and or member.
Right. So, I just want to go over this quickly because this is gonna come up. So the deck schema. So a schema says what types of cards do you have. so again, like I said, in when you're just starting out and you don't know what you're doing, all that matters is that you know you're playing a game to mind map whatever you're doing. You could be gardening. You're gonna do a mind map garden, right, or a garden mind map. You can have
a map of the garden, a map of your path through the garden, a map of not necessarily a drawing of it, but just
the
list.
What's going to grow throughout the season, when you're going to plant that. You can have a booklet. It doesn't have to be cards, right? So it's
watering schedules, blah blah blah.
It's really media agnostic, and this is why we can easily switch over to computer programs, and this can take off much more virally, so to speak.
But the idea is to still reflect the action. The idea is to put out a reflection of the activity that you're doing in such a way that is informing the activity as well, rather than just being a record of it.
Right.
And the reflection and the activity, as they inform each other, evolve.
Yep.
And this becomes essentially a record of commitments. In and of itself, that you can now then reference back on, and reiterate over and perfect, so to speak, as one would with any skill.
Right. Yeah, and that's a key.
And
the feedback.
And potentially pass the information forward, as we are prone to do.
So. Before we get into this, actually, so I just want to go through these stack of roles. So, so this is a game environment. We're starting off with players, the Players Guild book here. So player's role. When you step into a game environment, you know there's a bunch of rules. You don't know what it is. So along the lines of how we've been stacking carriers in our model, we've been describing that. We're doing the exact same thing here. So player is one of the lowest ones. This is like...
How do you send signals onto this carrier?
This is very archetypal.
Like how do
that
the basic grammars that you can utilize to affect this carrier
is that you are mind mapping, you're projecting, and then you're receiving feedback. It's feeling good or bad, and you're increasing your skill as you go along.
So
put that into any domain, and it's the same. It's a game.
So this is layer 1 in that stack. All these protocols create outputs into the game, and these outputs now become new kinds of signals on a higher layer. So this just gives you the how to send information out through. The next layer will be, well, what do you want to say with this information in each individual instance? And so now that you've learned how to send out these kinds of messages out, now you can use them to build an expression of a much bigger meaning, pertaining to a more abstract role beyond that of just a player, but a player with a purpose. And then you start to exert that purpose through the language of the player into the game.
Yes. Yeah, and so moving forward with your purpose, you're still projecting and receiving feedback and feeling good or bad, and it's depending on how your skill is.
And that's just a small, tiny little jump in the layer. After you have purpose, you have bigger and more holistic purposes that are driving the individual purposes of each individual action, right? So there's another myth that is being built, and so the idea now is you have a language that now that creates purposes within that language. How do you bring now the full-blown myth into this language with purposes, and how do you reconstruct that myth through these little layers?
Okay, yeah. So what you've described, I think, is kind of like the bouncing through pragmatic and devotional part, and stepping back even further. I jumped, I don't know if you noticed, but I jumped straight to that kind of the heroes
Yeah.
role.
So okay. So the hero's role is a very, very much unified purpose. Yes.
Yeah, right. So the hero's role can involve anything else, literally, like just making your life better, the life of those around you better, being the hero. Um, so in here, like,
By the way, this is the word hero is specifically from the hero's journey
right,
idea.
commitment to the journey of increasing coherence, as we put it, which
Yeah.
is, in other words, life, negentropy, isomorphism, etc.
Yeah. It's Joseph Campbell is the guy to go to for understanding this concept, the hero's
Yeah.
journey. So it's not ours. Just so you know, it's a known concept, and it's basically worth your time knowing it.
Right.
Outside of this discussion.
And in the context of Portal Mountain and our work, one of the
One of the criteria for being the hero. If you
one
will.
of the purposes is the attainment of quest artifacts, which is the understanding of this holonic modeling system, so that you can model domains of behavior properly.
The quest artifact, if you remember, if you were to look at Portal Mountain as a game itself, the quest is to gain this artifact, which is a bit of knowledge.
Right. It's the how to interact, how to model properly. This is what we've been talking about the whole time.
This is the quest artifact in a different
Right.
incarnation.
So this is why this, for me, is the second role on top of player, right? So we've got hero, then we've got, and I think these are probably in order. So facilitator. What is a facilitator doing? So we've got player, we've got hero. Might as well put those in view. So a facilitator creates a mind map in order to help people a shared understanding of reality. That's in the most generic sense.
So the only thing if this guy is in an environment and this guy is the pinnacle of that of what to do in that environment, then this will provide that environment.
I don't quite get what you mean by provide.
So the player has to navigate an environment using a certain set of rules.
Okay.
This provides a certain set of rules of how the
Yes.
environment is working.
And so I am right now.
Together, it's a combination of this being in this.
Right.
Organism, environment. That's how I see it, unless I'm wrong.
Cool. Probably, but there's the fact that I am using mind mapping materials right now to facilitate an understanding, a shared understanding. That's what we're doing with this media.
Right. So, if player 1 versus player 2, the bridge between them, right? The rules that allow them to interact using their rules come from here. That's what I'm saying. This is a bridge between individual players that say, in order for this player to be able to interact with them, this is the protocols.
And you're calling this environment?
Yeah, because this is like the common denominator, right? Like if I have to use air between us to talk to you, right? So this booklet will say, okay, this is the language that you can use in the air.
Right.
While here I can say these things, here it will say them in English.
So notice we're stacking in complexity in a regulated way. With the player, and then the hero, these don't need to involve anybody else at all. You don't need to express it even.
And this can
doesn't need to be expressed.
And technically juxtaposed on any environment.
When we stack facilitator on top of that, now we are explicitly going out into the environment and sharing the mind map.
So what we can expect is a common language between the participants in that environment, being able to exchange artifacts that mean the same things across that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of a video I was watching very recently about communication, talking, and how the brain works. And what they're finding is that when a brain is individually looked at, participating in a conversation, it has a certain synchronicity between its speech and hearing reactions, right? But what they're looking at, two brains communicating with each other, the same thing happens, and they also sync up with each other, right? So like the dance that the brain is doing internally transposes across two brains, and they start to interact almost as if a single mechanism. And the Facilitator
Yeah.
Guild book is essentially an example of that phenomena, except in a different, much more abstract context of ideas now, where it's not people individually talking to each other, but now it's like ideas out in the ether, sort of doing the same interaction, say having the same kind of relationship, still needing us, obviously, to enact them out, right? But the level at which this interaction is now happening is conceptual and far more abstract than generic talking, or like punch bugging or punchback kind of stuff.
Yep.
So same idea, different layer. Again, we're talking about scale and variance. So we're jumping
Yeah.
right ahead and talking as if it's true.
Yeah, so we are constructing potentially a language at each one of these roles. So how to be a player, how to be a hero, how to be a facilitator. And each one of these is going to have different, okay, if you're a facilitator, if somebody doesn't understand what you're saying, then do this. If you don't have enough of this medium, then do this.
Yeah, it's basically play into incoherence of the players, or decoherence, I guess, whatever, and use the underlying model that they're playing into to give them the kind of feedback of you're not coherent or you are coherent, and to be coherent do this, to be not
Right.
to feed yourself back into the system in better and more constructive rather than destructive patterns.
Yes, so we are trying, in other words, not to break constraints.
Yeah,
Because
and
each role is going to have its ideal view of the playing field. Yeah, every single role. And those are going to involve constraints. And when things look bad, that means constraints have been broken. And when they look bad, there's going to be, if it looks bad in this way, then do this. If it looks bad like that, then do this. And these are protocols.
yeah, and these would be overreaching above, slightly above the circumstances of the individual player, putting together the circumstances of the game itself into the forefront, so that the individual players' conflicts can be resolved on a platform that does not revolve around their inputs specifically, but a third-party input, if you will, that can
Objective.
diffuse, so to speak,
Right.
the localized conflict.
Yeah, that's part of facilitating, for sure, is kind of mediating. That would be another word. Mediator and facilitator.
Yeah, it would definitely
Very-
translate to mediation on
Yeah.
some levels, for sure. Like
Mediation
mediation would be an example of that.
kind of implies conflict.
But mediation is basically a concrete example of something far more abstract, a far more abstract and repetitive pattern in general. That happens.
So I would say mediator's role depends on facilitator's role. So it's
So
going to be higher up in the stack.
pull up the car diagram for a second.
Car diagram. Pulled.
What do you see there in the middle bottom?
Mediation agent.
It's part and parcel of the model, right? Like you can't avoid that little step, and it always sits between recognition and expression of two carriers, whichever ones they may be. They might be the same carrier,
Yeah.
so this could be passive, but
Yeah, this doesn't imply a conflict though,
But mediation is part and parcel of the model, is what I'm saying. It doesn't imply conflict, but when conflict arises, this still is in effect.
it implies a misunderstanding, you could say. And that's why you need a translation across carriers.
You need a translation across carriers regardless. It becomes far more obvious when there's conflict. So conflict
For
makes
sure.
conflict will make this picture more obvious, is what I'm saying.
All right. So, let's see if we can
But mediation is always involved.
speed along through a couple more of these roles.
We have a mediation layer, for crying out loud.
Next.
It's the same layer.
Yes, we win. The big brain am winning again.
For no reason.
Okay, so facilitator. We've got facilitator, which is just that basic idea of sharing and mind mapping, understanding. Next, and again, I think these are in order. They should be, hopefully. So, deck player. And let's see what's it. The first page is blank. Deck player. Is this going to tell me anything very quickly? Okay, so we're not just any facilitator. We are facilitating using deck protocol. We are having cards. Typically, this is why, it could be in booklet format, but deck players typically use index cards, and they have a box of cards, and they come together on the tabletop, and they say, okay, let's start laying down cards, and we'll see where we're at. You know, you can have all different kinds of games, whether it's political battle or just trying to figure out a space if you have a conflict within a certain shared space, or some upgrades need to be done to the shared space. Now we're using decks specifically so that I can pull this card out of my deck and say, okay, have you guys heard of this? Like, here's how to make new cards. Now you've got media going, you know, and then we can exchange cards and make copies and duplicates and this kind of stuff. So that's adding on another role, deck player.
So, if I were to just reiterate what we were going about the environment and whatever, so the previous book would have been more about the job of the facilitator, not necessarily in this or that environment, whereas this one is actually like tying the job to the environment, so you actually need both in order to be a real facilitator. In a particular game, like you have the role of the player, which just tells you that this is what players do. You have the role of the facilitator, which just tells you what facilitators do.
Right.
Then you have the hero, which is a particular player, which means he's got to play a particular way.
Player, hero, facilitator.
And then you got the deck players who says, okay, this is how you do it in this environment specifically. So with all of these other rules.
Yeah, facilitation is a very generic idea.
Yeah.
Here we are facilitating using index cards.
Exactly. Yeah. So abstract, concrete.
And again, we're seeing the stacking of carriers of languages and roles and agents at each step of the stack, leading up to something.
So these are definitely fundamental books for the concept.
Yep, that was my aim. I tried to honestly lay it out where this is the very beginning, very start.
Yeah, no, this makes sense to play that way, and I don't know if we can carry it further without getting into specific games.
Right. And it keeps going because remember we need to talk about membership and injecting membership into natural, into proximal.
Sure.
Right. So. It keeps going. Deck Players Guild Book. Have we said all we can about that? I think.
If it basically solidifies what the environment is, meaning that all of these activities now have to conform to the environment's language, this environment's language in particular, this deck style.
Right.
then you've just honed in on every
Yeah.
aspect of what you're going to be writing and where.
So it's like a Cambrian explosion at every single layer. Here we're having a Cambrian explosion of cards, of index cards just exploding, and this is what I want to be able to share. It's like a Pokemon game or that kind of stuff. Whatever, you get together, you share cards.
Cambrian's overrated.
Whatever.
Just
Doesn't
say.
matter. You get it. So like something happens evolutionarily or whatever on a stack, and then you've got the grammatic constriction and then expansion, right?
Yeah.
So you're constraining down to certain symbols. This symbol is a small piece of data that captures an idea. It's like a meme or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? And you want this so that you can hold in your hand a little bit of data and be like, okay, I see your whole system there, but have you thought about this?
And then it should be unfolding just because it's already pre-made in the system.
Yeah, so this is the idea of having little atomized bytes of data that can all work together.
Well, really, this is the subject of memetics.
Yeah. And so this is how the idea, like we're already seeing here that this idea can sort of expand into a global type of brain idea, right?
And what I'm saying is that this is the expansion of the standard model of memetics.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're literally now, you're not using memes from the internet perspective of like, oh, here's a silly picture, you're still doing the same thing. Here, let's plug that little tiny bit of info in and see what happens, which is exactly how memes work, right? Like memes, the picture is the artifact. It's meaningless on its own. It's you seeing that hand motion that tells you it's about this. It's you seeing a big nose that tells you it's about Jews. It's you know like I have my own pain points, but big lips. We all know what that is going to lead to, right? Like,
what kind of memes are you looking at there, Zhenya?
I am looking at the current shit show that is the internet. We've all seen those pictures. I mean, we all know why those particular combinations of lines draw our attention and what they mean.
And so
it's our culture that tells us what they mean, not
so this
pictures.
picture meme, it. Like on the internet, you got a picture with some words. You can just go like this. Have you thought about this? And it's like this thing just explodes into a whole bunch of things, right? It's a very tight package, and that's the whole point. Yeah. Is that it plays on a whole bunch of biases and assumed things and all kinds of stuff. And the meme itself is what's happening when you load it up into your thing, and then your brain processes. That's the meme happening. It's not the picture itself.
So that's the surface work of this, which is greatly covered in one of our diagrams, where we have the where we have space, time, we have the narrative, we have the hyper narrative, the meta narrative, and then feeding back
the big chart.
Yeah.
So we just call it the big chart. I think.
That's basically all that is. It's how I take a tiny little meme, a sound bite, and plug it back into the system, and it just works.
Yeah.
This is play on that model.
So because we just want to hold on. We want to be able to just inject this little thing, right? We don't want it to have to come with all this baggage of. Okay, have you interfaced with my hierarchical organization correctly? And is this thing injected with all the proper packaging? Like, we want to get rid of that and say, okay, generically speaking, when you're dealing with this, have you thought about that?
Yeah. And the counterpart to that is that we're also developing this heuristic, which we keep calling the model, as a way to intercept these things almost automatically, and being able to do exactly what Brian is saying, to be able to like take a little piece of paper like that, have it plug into this internal informational matrix, and be like, I know what you're talking about.
It's a soundbite.
Without having to ask him, hey, are you certified to giving me this information that that yours, where's your authority coming from, and like all of that.
You're triggering me.
Like all of that professional elitism is undermined by the adoption and of this heuristic of internalization of this information, without having to. It, it becomes less and less about credentials and more about simple human reaction to human situations, rather than
Right.
abstract reactions to abstract situations.
And something being designed in such a generic way. Like, if I need an index card, cut up a piece of paper. Like, in the most generic way, like that, you can't argue with that.
And then you can say index card, and or somebody will know, cut up a piece of paper, or booklet protocol, and somebody knows. Oh yeah, don't put more than 5 pages. It's going to be overloaded or something.
You can't. Just staples don't go through.
Just taking that one word and immediately knowing. Oh, it means this whole story. Again, words are stories. They're not. This is playing back into the mythology of our more natural way of looking at the world, if you will. Claim, yeah, I know, whatever. If you want to dispute that, go ahead somewhere and write your essay. The point I'm more concerned with is the fact that words do not evolve from a vacuum. They evolve from the mythology that they come from. This plays into it as a fact. It relies on these words plugging into your pre-existing mythologies, which are done through the heuristics of understanding this model. Much like our current memes on the internet work by pressing buttons that you already are supposed to be familiar with. Hence the mentioning of the... I mentioned the crude ones because you'll immediately know what the fuck I'm talking about, by the way. Like, nobody's confused about those.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sad part, actually.
Right. So, so deck player role. You're using index cards. You're creating a database. So the database could be a booklet database. You're still a deck player. You're just arranging it with slightly different media, and you're trying to atomize knowledge in a mind map that can be easily transmitted.
There's the, if I may, my academic understanding. This is where you build membership, mediation, and this is mediation and. Membership, mediation, and network. Right. Heroes being the work done in the network, right? This...
I don't know if it's all going to line up to something. This is just a stack. It's
no,
an
I
arbitrary
know.
stack.
I'm just seeing the parallels already. This is just me. I might be wrong, but like that's not the those specifics are not the important part. But say you've established this. At this point, you've established fundamental guilds, which means you're already at the point of having the membership and the mediation guild set up, and a hypothetical, not yet ready, proximity guild, which this fixes.
Yeah, I haven't tried lining it up like that. This just happens to be what I could see as needed.
But
which should line up.
I'm not too surprised that it would, because what's happening here is that this is the recreation of the guild dynamic theory, if you will, in action.
Mm-hmm.
And why wouldn't it line up? You're literally going through a process of establishing membership, mediating it, creating the abstract proximity guild itself, right? And then the actual guild.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and a deck basically represents a proximity guild. Every proximity guild should be able to be represented by a deck, a mind map, a collection of data.
I think doing these 4 steps will do that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then to bring up the other guilds, you basically do this in parallel, right? Like you just bring these proximity guilds in parallel like this, and their interaction is going to be underlined by these.
Yeah. I have a feeling the coherence is going to spiral out of control as we go on, but
No. This is obviously this is a stab in the. These were a stab in the dark. My layout is a stab in the dark.
That seems
but
right.
if we take those two together and sort of think this through a bit more, I'm sure we'll find the actual books that we need.
And we know that we need the fundamental guilds to be established before anything is really happening.
Mm-hmm.
The guild, in terms of the guild.
So yeah, so the third book, although it is about networking, it's like about the abstract, an abstraction of what a proximity guild is, like not a concrete one yet. And then each one of these books would then facilitate. Okay, this is what you do for loopback. This is what you do for geography, for family, for any kind of association.
Yep.
And then on the associative one, you can now create a whole bunch of other books on that layer, because association could be completely arbitrary, right? Whereas the first few are limited to, one is limited to your own body, right? And your own activity. The second one is limited to like the immediate family, not family biologically, but the immediate.
Right. I didn't.
And then the geographical limitations. All of these you need to work within those specific constraints.
Right.
But further association out, you get freedom.
I'm pretty sure I just jumped straight up to association.
No, I know. That's why I brought it back to these.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to cover these
fine.
little ones. So you'd have a couple of more that are more basic, just because these situations come up all the time. They're consistent. It's when you hit a straight up arbitrary association where you can start getting books about sewing and changing tires and all of that shit, gardening.
Yep. So to carry on with, and again, who knows how the coherence here is going to spiral out or whatever. So deck player. The next one I had was dashboard. Wait, is this? No, why did I write protocol? Is this one of the guild?
This sounds like an all-encompassing one.
Guild books. Okay.
You don't have to use it right away.
I don't know if it like I would have wrote guild book, I think. So this might have just got thrown in there. Deck player. Holographer, and then
So holographer would be a
Zettelkasten
specific guild, wouldn't it?
yeah, I wonder if these got mixed up though.
I forget what the idea behind this one was.
So this is like triad protocol, dealing with temperaments. Is that it?
If it's not relevant, it's not relevant.
Well, I'm sure I used it somehow. And I had the quest artifacts in here as well. Temperaments.
I don't know. Like, to me, this is just my opinion.
Yep.
I think that this is like a lot to take in already.
Yep.
And if we keep attaching more and more to it, we're not necessarily going to clarify anything.
Yep.
And I'm already really liking the fact that we've discovered a way to rebuild guild dynamics and then plop the last book onto it, and then boom, this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I really like that idea.
I think this is all fluffy right now. This, though, I think does make sense still. So you've got this deck, you're making mind maps. What the dashboard, so dashboard users guild book, the dashboard users guild book. So the idea here, when you are navigating reality, you have a dashboard, an internal dashboard, right? It's like imagine like the Terminator 2 when he's
No, I got a better description.
when he's sizing up that the dudes in the bar, and he's got like like there's the little their overlays and the relay, and it says, okay, the shirt pants size, like these are the right size. So the dashboard is like this overlay of your current objectives, like what you're doing, your task stack, right?
Yes. Also, I'd like to point out that there's a different aspect to it. Like, think of your body and just like the complexity of its nervous system and whatnot. You don't control your eye by telling your nerve system by telling one nerve to do this and another
Yes.
nerve to do that.
It's a high
and
level.
another. You say in your head, you're like, I want to look left, I want to look right, I want to move this. Like, it's all the descriptions you're using. They're very loaded and
Yes.
so you have like these levers and buttons that you push, and all of a
This
sudden these
is-
complicated actions take place. So
This is
what I asked.
analogous. That's a very good analogy, and that's fine, accurate. But so dashboard protocol, we specifically want to get into the yep, and definitely I'm missing some books here. We want to get into the deck schema, because there's a deck schema user role. And that's where you are ordering this dashboard as an overlay to your life, quote unquote, which is keeping track of your commitments and your objectives, as well as your meta task scheduler.
Mm-hmm.
And having this as an overlay over what you're doing. And
Yeah.
so this is what we are doing as people coming together at this tabletop, is we are kind of battling dashboards together.
So really, what this is saying is that in order to do all these actions and to record them, load this up into the dashboard of your mental structure. That's what
Yes.
this is what this protocol is telling you.
Yeah.
Load these up as a dashboard, and navigate the world using these levers and buttons, so to speak, as the mechanism by which to navigate that. Obviously,
Yes.
with the feedback involved, process involved.
Yes, yeah, and this is kind of an abstract thing. Like, these are protocols and constraint type of viewing. When you're saying load up, I'm thinking protocols and constraints, like in the abstract.
These give you this gives you a bunch of protocols of how to be a member. Right. This gives you protocols of how to mediate.
And the player role as a thing that's existing and moving forward. This is a program, right?
Yeah.
You're loading up a program. The program is taking the contents of the protocols.
So these would be the proximity guilds you're
and
talking
applying
about, right?
them to.
You're referring to the proximity each proximity guild individually by programs.
It would be probably 1-to-1.
Okay.
I think so. Yep.
Well, considering you can have all these weird combinations of loop back / this / that, it should work.
And so it doesn't have to be this complicated. This is the part of the game that's daunting, challenging. Is that yes, it does get up to this level, but if you want to just start playing the Zettelkasten game, you can do it at a guest coherence, and you can just start simply using mind mapping media.
Yeah, actually, to bring that point even further home, you just need this guy. If you have somebody who knows these elements within that within the interaction, they fill in those gaps.
Right, and you can facilitate a meeting or a company objective or whatever. It doesn't have to be model related, and things happen. People come together and they do stuff.
That's the whole point of keep pointing back to the proximity guilds being as like the springboard of the rest of the, especially the association guilds, the springboard for everything else. Right.
Yep. Cool. Shall take small break,
please,
for a bit. To be right back. And mutings. The idea is of having the space of a tabletop where you're having the game. So the game is going along. You have a specific space for it where minds are converging using mind mapping, right?
Right. So we're back at the idea of being in a carrier environment, space-time again.
Yeah.
Like literally, this is all comes back to that process.
It should. Yep. Up and down the stack, and up and down again.
What do you think I got so hung up on it? It's like all of a sudden, hey, this explains all the things.
Yeah, so one of my booklets was definitely model, schema, user, role. But I lost it. And
It's
I don't know,
okay.
so it was more, so I know like it was more organized.
I'm surprised
past,
I'm surprised we finally got to it. To be honest, like it's
past this
taken.
part. So you're seeming to be understanding like what's going on here then?
Yeah, with this delineation, it makes perfect sense for
Yep.
what we've been doing.
And now keep in mind that so this is using booklet representation. These booklets like they
Well, the booklets is just one way.
I did that because it's fast. So they should be in more card format, and specifically in. So we didn't get to deck, schema,
You know
user,
what?
protocol.
You know what? I'll be honest with you. We might actually stand to benefit from researching the kind of the landscape of office supplies right now, like to see what quote unquote has been invented, if you will, for recording information right now. Like obviously,
Why?
like I mean,
Okay.
you obviously know about binders, you know about like
I know a lot, man. I've done
like
a lot of
journals,
research.
all of that shit, right?
You're talking to an expert here, all right? So what's your idea?
Just taking a look and seeing what's worth.
This is the best.
What's worth investing
This is
into.
best of the best right here.
Here's my issue
What's-
is going through this process.
What, stapling it?
Yeah, I can guarantee you a lot of people will look at this and be like, I don't want to hold things look like this. You're just gonna come across this,
Oh.
and
you
it's because
want
we are
the
living
product created already?
and we are living in a world of retards. So, I mean, marketing retards. Sorry. Like, retardation brought on by marketing. Let's put it this way: we're slow in the head in terms of accepting something useful.
Right. Okay. Now I've got a counterpoint. Is that
Unless it looks pretty.
we are disintermediating. We are taking back responsibility.
Yeah, you're not gonna do it with people that don't listen to you.
People who they've self-selected themselves away already, so it's fine. But okay, I got your point.
There's an there's an aesthetic element that you have to play into.
as far as mimetic fluidity and all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah, this is the envelope.
Totally get it.
This is the envelope. You got to play the marketing game to an extent. because
Now,
because the marketing ontology
where I
is the
wanted-
one that works.
Where I wanted to start with media, since it's you're getting a hold of physical like space and time, is that this should be accessible to the most people. So
So
this right here is.
So some of these booklets should be pre-made.
There is already that concept. This is called the starter deck.
Yeah.
You mean filled out already?
Yeah, like-
with
like-
protocols. Yep,
Like these.
it's a starter deck.
Yeah, for sure.
The guild book is very close to the idea of a starter deck.
Okay. Yeah, this will work. Well, I mean, to the extent that I can predict.
Yep. It does. It does. It does.
Especially, and I can't stress this enough, if it starts to build on the same principle as guild dynamics, it's then going to actually follow the same trajectory as guild dynamics has to. Like it's going to be built into that. So I can't really see a different way outside of this kind of presentation. Well, I can see a different way, but what will not happen is the guild dynamics setup. right? If you don't focus on that, it's just not gonna work.
Yeah. So I forget where we're at with that particular documentation. Like, I know what you're talking about, like with fundamental guilds and the embedding of carriers in carriers,
Yeah.
such as the triadic formula, the holonic formula of membership in a mediation in network, right?
It's a little confusing.
Go for it. Yeah.
Have we discussed that protocol to your satisfaction?
Nope. No, we haven't even started the game
Will
yet.
we ever?
We haven't even started. So like, let's just try to like theorize or whatever, or play a mock pseudo game. You know, like, let's just talk about the dynamics of if we were to play a game together. If we were to play a game together right now, what would it involve? How would you start it? What would you write? Let's assume index card media.
Like, okay.
Like, this is where even I start yawning.
So for between you and me, this like what I would push for immediately.
What? Towards the academic?
Yeah, like all the way through to the academy. All the way through.
Yeah.
Why would I do that? Because I would like to establish the full range of the environment.
The archetype, in other words.
Full blown, and I can do that already.
But you want to inject the archetype into the media.
Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, I get it.
I'm both the most correct person to do this exercise with initially, but also the most frustrating. I will be the most frustrating.
Well, I think
because I'm not a beginner.
You know who you're talking to, right? I am well aware.
The only person that can stand me, yes. One of the few people that can stand me.
That's actually my superpower on this earth, is that I can handle you. I can stand your talking and speech and the ways that you are.
The person, or whatever her name was.
Sure.
She, we were having personal chat, and she's like, "Man, you really do talk like a machine. This is fascinating."
Fascinating. Yeah, she kept saying that a couple times. But that's that kind of detached. See, that's probably one of her own heuristics, is that if things start to get ego-y, conflicting, then just start to be like, project a fascinated stance. Like, oh wow, this is really interesting. Like, how into it you are, and like, start. That's her approach. I don't think
it's a projection. Because that suggests something not.
No, I'm saying no.
Projection suggests not genuine, but what it is.
We do, and that's a kind of signal you may want to give out, is that you are fascinated by this rather than triggered and upset.
Yeah. My trigger problem is different. It is its own thing.
Yep. You could learn from her though. In that regard.
I did. I backed off right away when I caught wind of what's happening.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's cool. So the game, strike pointing, this would basically be our strike point. It's like, okay, here we are right now in space and time. That is our context. There's no question of what the game looks like right now, except to just start it. But that's a very difficult point to actually do.
Yeah, what is space? What is time? What is relevant space? What is relevant time? I think would be the main questions, because there's a signal-to-noise ratio issue to resolve. We are working from a framework that is heavily influenced by entropy, right?
Yes, and so we have to be aware of it. Like, if you're just going to spew out a bunch of cards that nobody's going to get it, and then you never look at them again, like, what was that?
In fact, I'm sure that some people are looking at these cards today and will be like, "What the fuck is this?" Um, Again, without that environmental building of context to inject meaning into the memes themselves, the memes do not have a life of their own and they become noise, garbage, and
Right.
so on and so forth. So entropy
Yep.
is a very real problem to deal with. This is a continuous effort, always will be. Entropy is our resident bitch. Our little atheistic pantheon. But I always actually, I always picture the primordial archetypes as characters on stage. So uncertainty is this one individual
Right.
who
Which is a great way to look at it.
who you don't ask questions because they never know the answer to it. They're nice. They're just never sure.
Well, yes and no.
Entropy is a straight up bitch, so just be prepared for that.
Fine. Yep. So I played a card, and this is just an example. We're still
Space-time is a hippie.
we're a game in a unconstrained game right now. We have a tabletop, so this is our tabletop. We know that much. We know we can play cards. We haven't introduced any other rules. So in other words, it's a free-for-all. It's a complete free-for-all right now. What I wrote down was an entropy protocol. Is that only write down what you're going to read later.
Now try
And
to figure.
I've already read it later, so this has already passed its own test, its own heuristic.
Yeah. The question is how many things will be subjected to the heuristic. So while this is clear,
Right.
is clear as day, the actual activity is clear as mud.
Right, and so you have to be aware of things that you can apply this to, which you're committed to.
So no, this goes. Well, yes, but this goes back to you have to throw it out there, and then you have to get it to respond back to you and feedback you with information to say, yes, I am coherent. No, I am not coherent. Yes, leave me. No, get rid of me.
Uh-huh.
Just
Sorry.
gonna get rid of that.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was just thinking, setting the stage, a little bit.
Yeah.
Better.
Need a lighter there.
No.
So yeah, like that. So even this, while it seems like it's couldn't get any downright clearer than this, you'll find that you're actually not going to do this immediately. You will write down things you don't know whether you'll read later or not,
Right.
and then you will have
Very
to
often, yeah.
actually come back to it and clear out your
Right.
garbage, so to speak, and
Yes.
clear
And
out the debris.
so-
And this is entropy gaining momentum itself into the process.
But if you were thinking beforehand and you gave it that second thought, like, do I actually need? Is this relevant? In other words, does this build up some of my narratives, my ongoing story?
And this is the energy spent into making entropy negative. So this is that process. So again, life versus the universe.
Yep.
Speaking of that, I kind of want to touch on the whole word number dissipation.
Okay, we didn't talk about
Stuff.
that. This is a last week's topic. For sure, very topical. You wrote up some things.
Yeah, the idea is to bring.
Where did you write them up?
This will be in the document I shared with only a few people. You can bring it up.
Is it the something nothing one? Or?
Yeah, you have access. You have access to. I don't know if the text itself is meaningful to bring up. It's just the gist of the concept that I wanted to really talk about.
Right.
And really, the only reason I want to bring it up is to bridge a gap between the whole quantum-like representation that we have of the Polyverse, together with the notion of energy dissipation and all of that stuff within the entropy, and bring a similar model to thoughts and actions, and how thoughts will be like thoughts are more like the potential of action, living in the space of what I termed pure meaning, but in this essence it's living in a layer that is indecipherable to layers below it in the stack. So that's where that comes from. And the symbolic shunting of these words, the activity of these words, translate down the stack into activities of the stack in terms of speech, in terms of action, in terms of function, and thoughts and whatnot, all of which are assessed through a mathematical universe, if you will, because the universe works through mathematics.
You mean can be modeled.
And so when the translation, like the translation of go over there can be transformed into a mathematical equation of of transformation of space and time, right? So when you do that transformation,
you can't equivocate though and say this is that.
No, we're not saying that. We're saying that when words with meaning, like I'm going to go over there, transform into actions of myself going over there, the energy of those words is being quote unquote spent, if you will, into these actions. And so we can imagine a parallel of energy dissipation going through the layer back from potential to actualization.
Wait, so like the energy that the words represent.
And also the idea itself, after you have performed the action, is now gone, right? Like because you've performed the action, the idea itself disappears.
And this is the carrier stacking thing, where you have a body and all these things and energy and muscles, but also a mind, so to speak, which has a concept of such said organs and whatnot. And so
I'm talking about the parallel.
And when you say energy spent, it's not like when the thought happens, boom, a massive zap or explosion.
Right. No, not that.
Right, but the thought is tied into these through the cascading
of move this arm, twitch this muscle, twitch this nerve,
through layers. This equals this, like.
And eventually, as you are walking through space and time, the idea of walking through space and time morphs into arriving at that at the final location, with the action just being the energy spent, if you will.
This chart informative.
Yeah.
At this point.
So
it's another great example of that, the stacking.
So the idea is that we can capture this phenomena of transformation of energy from potential to actual by alluding to the transformation of words in a language which only talk about the occurrences that they are themselves define, right? The world of words is about words. It's all about how, if you have this word and that word, it means that word, and blah, 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 just grammar rules, all that kind of jazz. And with it, along the side of potential mapping of meaning of those words to things experienced out in the world by the mind that is ascribing things with words.
And it might be interesting to think of the highest level. What is your connection of words with experience, and how do you learn what a word is over time? What is the experience of learning a word over time?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like to describe this is the very top of what a word is. It's a completely abstract, nowhere, nothing thing, right? Which doesn't exist.
But eventually, all these words.
But it comes to be.
Yeah, but eventually, all these words point to the actions as they are experienced, right? But these actions as they are experienced,
and by you say point to.
If I feel mad, if I feel whatever, like these words are pointing to experiences I'm having, not necessarily pointing to what's causing them or the mechanisms behind.
When the experience bubbles up,
there,
the word pops up in your head because the experience bubbled up.
Yeah. So now we have this system of all these words pointing to different words, saying I mean this, I mean that, and I'm talking about this, and I'm talking about that. But eventually, like when it comes to functioning in the environment itself, no matter what those words are, you're still going to be moving hands, moving eyes, eating, talking.
Right.
You're going to be doing actions that are very, very, very regular mathematically in the environment itself. right?
Resonant inner and outer.
Right. So there's going to be a mapping between these actions and these words, but when the performance of those actions can be reinterpreted in many kind of different words, right? But the mathematical meaning of them is arbitrary, basically at this point, and it's just all about whether the mechanics work or not on those layers. So so all meaning becomes lost in the number game, because you can now derive this meaning or that
Right.
meaning or this other meaning or whatever meaning, but the actions remain the same.
So
and
this
they
is a
don't
gradient,
speak to that.
a gradient between word down to number.
Yeah,
And
no-
this is also the yang down to yin.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
chaos,
So
order,
here
order
it's all,
chaos terms.
Here it's all meaning and no math, because math makes no difference. Like it doesn't matter what you call the 3. It doesn't matter what you call it 2. It's only when the words work together and it means something back to you again, in those words that you're never leaving that sphere. But on the bottom, there's no meaning to any of those. There's just these actions that
Right.
either work or do not, and blah, blah,
But all these meanings they were meanings, and now they are quantized.
yeah, there. So now we're looking at a resonating isomorphism. Right now we're looking at codings versus agents.
And it's a codependent arising type of situation.
It's exactly. So the to bring it all back to why this all matters, and because the quantum world, if you will, works on this principle of entropy resonation and feeding energy into what's there by sending carrier particles over, and those carrier particles contain enough information to make a certain change. Well, the stacks really operate in the same fashion, where messages get sent, and depending if you get the right, depending if you can depending if a layer can protocols in a layer can recognize
Right.
that message
As it comes up.
Yeah, it reaches
Excuse
that
me.
threshold of being able to manipulate that layer of energy.
And it's
So again,
it's
energy
kind of
being
like,
used
and then
more
things-
metaphorically here.
And then things either happen, this next layer poof appears, or it doesn't. This is
Right.
the coming back to the quantum theme we've had.
Yeah. So we have that, and also to finish this picture, when these messages get sent into a stack, right? You can imagine it being its word reservoir sort of building up in meaning, like oh this happened, oh this, like it's kind of like you can think of the energy buildup as epistemological, aka you become aware of certain things, and now your symbolic shunting inside your head encompasses these new
Right.
events.
Yeah.
And then to transform back into action, these reduce back into numerical calculations of movement and interaction with the environment.
Right. And
So-
this
so-
has been happening
so
since a
build
child.
up,
And
release, build
we've
up,
been
release.
learning, but what energy things tend to come into a certain groove of how to categorize and classify it. Since a child, we've been learning this, what it means to feel this and that, and how to react to it. Right. Like if
Yeah.
you know if you're watching your hand is going to touch something that's red hot, you're like, wait. Like
I'll
it's
give you a
been burned
better.
into
I'll
you.
give you a better example. We've all probably have been in feeling this one situation in which we're like, we just gained this one more idea of something, and all of a sudden everything clicks right into place, and then there's this cascade
Okay, yeah.
of understanding, and your mind just goes through all of these different scenarios
This is
where
plateau.
it's plugging this information into, and all of a sudden things get clearer and clearer and clearer.
Plateau
That really-
establishment.
So notice how a word of a meaning injected itself into your mind, and all of a sudden now these calculations start to happen, and these calculations are actually quite
Coherent.
within themselves, but but when they come out to the environment, they're also mathematical too. They're like, okay, gotta move this there, gotta move that there, gotta put this there. It's always going to reflect back into space and time, and how to rearrange it. And that rearrangement is what I'm talking about, being mathematical and by the point of rearrangement, you don't really have meaning anymore. You just have things in places, right? That's what I'm talking about. It losing meaning. Numbers don't indicate why they're doing what they're doing. They're just saying what they're doing. That sort of thing.
Damn.
So it's very so as a concept, as part of entropy, as I think it's a very important layer to understand, and the framing of it being from word to number is the dissipation of energy. I mean, I'm gonna pick on the New Agers a little bit here.
Yeah, there's a lot of like really, really philosophical type things of getting into, like that we're kind of approaching, like
But a lot of
just
these,
even the dissipation of heat and how that kind of relentless energy, like just so many combinations, right? Because there's energy at a plateau below, and it's causing so many combinations above until certain things start to click and hold on and click here, and then finally a platform, boom, now you've got something stable.
yeah, like
right?
if it reaches a threshold of we have enough crap to build from.
It's weird
all
to
over
think about
again.
that as a function of energy being input, because you just keep, it's like cooking, turning the burner on and cooking the water. Like shit starts happening above the water.
That's literally the scene we're working from. Like we're looking at the boiling point of where everything is happening all the time because some external source keeps feeding it that energy, and all that the system is trying to do is respond to that by putting that energy and
somewhere in the
using
most
it.
efficient way,
Yeah.
which happens to be the most complex way.
Yeah.
The more complex, the more efficient.
So this idea is actually comes from mathematics and experiments. So we're not too keen on.
But that's an
dropping it.
interesting kind of worldview that atheists, you'd think, would be all over. Like
Yeah,
that.
I've yet to see anybody.
Pardon?
I have yet to see anybody try to utilize it properly. It's weird. It's weird because
It's like a
the
myth.
people. It's the people that do this don't know anything about strange loops. The
It's a
people that know
creation
about
myth.
The people that know about strange loops can't seem to talk to anybody.
Yeah, definitely a communications divide. And this is like what I was trying to tell you earlier. Like some things are really hard to explain to people, and you can't do it in a rational way. It's more like, remember, I call it like an autistic view, where you're just pulling senses in from thousands of different points, and it's like clicking somehow in certain ways. And that's how you arrive at your decision. But there's
Well,
no point in trying to explain,
this goes
okay,
back
it's
to
because A
Gödel.
plus B equals C.
This goes back to Gödel, and again, it's a mathematical problem.
Yeah.
You cannot use an existing system to prove all truths. Some of them will simply lie outside of the logical,
Right.
logical formal system.
This sounds like uncertainty as well, kind of.
This is uncertainty.
Like an
This
outsideness.
uncertainty is a reflection of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like these things are probably very connected to each other. I would imagine. I would imagine that a mathematical limitation on not being able to prove everything by a system,
Right.
and the idea that you cannot prove where
And that-
but where the position and the velocity of a particle are at the same time, kind of go hand in hand.
Right. And that
Something
has to
is missing outside of
it
that
has
system.
to inject humility somehow. Like there has to be a way to communicate humility, right? And like the uncertainty and Heisenberg's shit and all that. Like for an atheist, that like, okay, if you can't explain like
Humility, yes, but not uncertain, but not. Sorry, uncertainty.
Like-
Uncertainty as a concept needs to be understood, but one needs conviction instead of doubt. Oh, doubt. That's the one I wanted to. Uncertainty is fine, but doubt is not. You know what I mean?
doubt is against a certain thing. Uncertainty is an open knowing of not knowing.
Doubt as a condition of reasoning.
That was my guess, by the way.
No, doubt as a precondition of reasoning. Like if you approach everything with the doubt, then you're effectively undermining your own convictions.
What kind of doubt? What example?
In the inability to stick to a single theme.
Like to me, doubt is like the critical type of angle. in that you're just breaking things down. Oh, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. But when do you ever
not
actually
not like skepticism, like not constructive skepticism, where you can doubt lacks discernment. It's when you don't discern something to be from this you're just doubting that
Okay.
without taking the further steps of actually analyzing. So it's a kind of it's a pre-blocking,
Excuse me?
precluding mindset, if you will.
Right.
You can't be,
which is unjustified. It's pure
Yeah.
like an ignorant ass.
Doubt is unnecessary because uncertainty is already in place. Like if you admit uncertainty, yeah, that would be my other point. If you already understand that there's uncertainty involved, what's the point of doubt? What role will it serve? Like, yeah, you know that this is not a certain thing, but what are you doubting?
Right, and moreover, your whole polyverse or world view is that of, like, we're not attached to some kind of system which has guaranteed results, and
Right.
that's what we're doing. It's
Yeah.
not that.
No, it's a
Right,
heuristic
you know,
result.
like-
It's not a guaranteed one.
Yeah.
In fact, guaranteeing in this context makes no sense. Because the actions are about only
Yeah.
because the model itself is in terms of potentials, not in terms of actuals.
I got you.
It's like saying, I'll twist this. I'll twist this another way. It's like doubt is stupid, in the sense of like doubting that there are electrons just because there's uncertainty in where an electron is. Right? You
Fine.
cannot tell certainly where an electron is, but to doubt that there is an electron
It's
does not follow.
Okay, doubt is actually a certainty, a commitment of certainty, in that you are certain that you doubt.
It's kind of ironic that way, yeah. Well,
No,
is
you are
it true?
you're taking the absolute position that you doubt. You,
No,
in other
I'm
words,
saying
you're
that would be ironic.
Yeah, that's we just uncovered the irony of that one. Doubt is actually a positive
So-
affirmation.
Huh. Gotta think more on that. But yeah, like so.
Which
so
that's the real thinker there. Yep.
So hence the lack of doubt when this discussion is coming up. So I'm sure this is a question some people have still,
Which one?
as to where the certainty comes from, despite
Where certainty comes from?
our certainty comes from.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a couple of reasons. In my opinion, one of them I've tried to express, which is just that if you have a model, you project it, the universe comes back to you with feedback. So that's all I'm trying to do. Usually, when I
Yeah, no,
seem
this is-
authoritative and saying, "Oh, this is how it is," I hope that I'm proven wrong, but I don't state that up
I
front.
think a lot of people are a little bit too anal about you seem too authoritative.
I guess it's
that
not a
taking
common.
that stance, but like I'm
It's
wondering.
not a common thing to do. That's what I've understood.
It's not a
that.
common thing to do.
No, I just have to assume.
So we don't use a common style.
No, I know people who their style is to express with authority and like think this is how it is and things are happening.
Who is that?
What? This chart?
Today at 12:30. Yeah, what is that? Is that okay?
Probably SOTS. Yeah, that's.
All right, is okay still there? Shouldn't be.
Yeah. No, not here. No, that's a client. You can go from channel to channel and still listen to the same audio.
Oh,
It's a client
Sorry.
client function.
I get confused by the technologies.
Is he back? Never mind.
KIF. It's KIF.
Don't
It's
mind.
the KIF reaction. I'm just gonna ban him next time. I don't even care anymore. I'm straight up banning.
It's called Entropy.
I'm straight up banning.
It's fine. Yeah, I wanted to just pull up this chart just because, something else we haven't pulled up yet, and along the chaos
Not
order
today.
thing, and the word number. seen
Yeah,
here, right?
order and chaos is where it's part of the duality interplay. Order, chaos, male, female, yin, yang, all that jazz.
Yep.
Fundamental and significant. Yeah, so order being represented by the word, chaos represented by the word number. Again,
Yeah, right.
the reason for number being chaos is because at the level of the algorithm, the meaning of why it's happening is lost, and so all you see is function but no story, right? You don't see the story behind the function, and so it's just things that are happening chaotically, basically. That's the idea behind that division of metaphorical division of the words, and to illustrate the similarity between dissipation of energy, we take this inner world view, transform it into actions, and then as the story dissipates through the actions, aka as you are doing part of the story, that part of the story is
Right.
no longer relevant. We're through it. AKA,
It feels like a program that wraps up, like how you can press the little triangle and it wraps up a bunch of code.
Yeah.
Up and up and up. So we're saying the story is expending this energy, but really it's this process and this happening, which we command from our facilities and say, oh, do that, and then you pick up a broom and start sweeping.
Yeah, and that's actual energy being spent. So,
Right.
So it's not too far of
Yeah.
an analogy.
And it's all just connected together.
Yeah, and trickle it back down to particles, and we just get the similar thing with photons and electrons. So yeah, ions being charged up, all that jazz. Similar sort of excitations that need resolutions.
True.
And so on and so forth. Basically, each time it's about this balance.
The balance.
That
You brought up.
discussion. Yes, balance.
I do remember you brought up something.
Let me look at this. Is actually quite important. That word.
This is a balance between expression and interpretation, or something. Receiving and.
Yeah, let me just.
You
How
gonna-
did I?
Are you gonna quote yourself?
Of course. So what did I say?
Balance.
Just had a thought. Rebalance. Balance.
Okay.
The ratio between encoding and decoding activities, as in how much is absorbed versus how much is expressed. Recognition and expression. Yeah.
Oh.
Balance that out. And for the new age,
This
balance
actually,
your energy. Yeah.
Wait, this talks about the physical distinction between a heavily centralized and mediated agent and a peer-to-peer agent, because the peer-to-peer agent will be putting out a lot more signal
Yeah.
from itself.
Yes.
And this is potentially what you're getting at.
Yes. Whereas the systemic agent is fed most of its energy all the time, and
fed instructions.
and then
basically.
is given a very scarce channels to release that energy.
Damn. Critical activism right there. Critical,
it
critical
falls under the
activists
same-
want to know about that.
It
because
falls
that's-
under critical activism falls under the same
Ooh-wee.
category
That
because they
is-
only have so many channels to release that energy.
No, that's my conception. I coined that.
What?
Yeah, critical activism. It sounded like
Oh,
you're trying
crit-
to pigeon it into like typical activism, which is
Yes,
completely
no.
different.
I hear the word activism. That's
Yeah.
all I think.
No, critical activism is a thing,
Okay.
which I coined years ago.
Sure.
With Anders. I think I'm going to give him credit because him and I are the only ones who know about it that I know of.
Pats on the backs, yo.
And there's the Reddit that nobody joined.
Yeah, we're pretty much out of time.
Yeah. You mean break time?
Great time.
I hear ya. Be right back. Oh yeah.
So yeah,
That there, balance we were talking about.
yeah. So balance. We were talking about the word energy as a metaphor for like the loading up of potential and the releasing it through movement and action and speech and whatnot and signaling.
Yep.
Essentially back out into away from the stack. So it's like the same as charging up an ion and having it release the extra photon or electron or
Right. It's
whatever
like
the case may be.
the story of the energy
Hmm.
dissipation.
So obviously we're like looking at this as an analogy for a higher.
And we tell that story because we want to give words to the quantity,
Mhm.
right, of what's happening. Something happened, quantization.
Right. So
Yeah.
we are
so
drawing.
balance.
We're drawing a parallel, and an interesting observation that appears out of that is that you could, like any particle, if you will, if you load that shit up with energy, it's not going to be able to hold on to it.
Right.
It's going to be what's called excited, right? And it will do whatever it can to get rid of it.
Interesting.
And I believe
Very
this is
fucking
now this
interesting.
is speculatory on my part, obviously, but I believe like these stacks that we're talking about would exhibit this kind of behavior.
Yep.
The more
Well, doesn't it feel like
more-
it sometimes when you're in a big situation and kind of stressed out and pumped up? You know, maybe a big moment of your life.
Look, you
And it's
feel
like
loaded up.
You
yeah.
just want to do it and get it
What does feeling?
done and how it should be.
What
and-
does feeling overwhelmed? What is feeling overwhelmed? Like, where does that come from? How do you feel overwhelmed? It's a mental phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right? Like nothing's physically happening. Oh, obviously, if you're physically overwhelmed, you die. Your body breaks and you
Right.
die.
No, but if you look at your body and situation from a completely alien perspective, you're just a pile of molecules sitting there. You're fine.
Yeah. But being overwhelmed mentally, like, how does that even, like? There is an analogy for having too much energy being locked in there and having nowhere to like release it, right? And so this is the points we're addressing, and parallelizing with the quantum scenario simply by seeing an analogy in the stack description. So balance.
So
Then would refer to.
an agitation of energy and narrative completion of the arrangement of objects to dissipate that.
Yeah,
story.
so closure. We like to use the word closure for this kind of stuff. That
Closure.
idea. So that idea probably fits. We can technically fit that in, by addressing it this way. Closure being this need to dissipate the words of the story in one's mind into actions and reactions into the world. I need to release that story back.
And it's interesting that there's this drive towards complexity, and that so in other words, through more complex stories, which maybe better and better take care of the situation and dissipate the energy.
Well, yeah,
properly.
as you see the energy that gets dissipated, right? Like if it's channeled a certain way, you'll find it creates other sets of ordered artifacts around it. So you see a problem, you're overwhelmed, you start to solve it, boom, you get an object out of that. For instance,
Right.
I don't know, you can't walk, you create a wheelchair. Crappy example off the top of my head, but the idea is effectively transferable to almost any situation here.
Yeah. So and transfer is a relevant word from one state to another.
Mm-hmm.
From having these anxiety energies of okay, I'm disabled or something, you know, and then
To reflect it back into the world in such a way that actually dissipates the actual problem. So the acknowledgement of the problem into the world actually eliminates the problem from the overwhelming's perspective, if you will, by having it offloaded, basically, and reflected back.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the creative process.
And then in a story, so you have a storyline now that's kind of resolved.
Yeah.
And you can stop being anxious about it.
Right. And the energy buildup is
Yeah.
now happening on top of this new framework.
So this is kind of how
For a new-
how it links up into the higher layers of experience of narrative and all that.
And as these objects keep being spilled out into the world based on these dissipations, right? They create their own sort of platform of things you can
Right.
construct
Okay.
together,
Yeah, yeah.
and they become their own layer that out
They
of
may work
which you can
together.
do new things.
Yeah.
And so the complexity story actually runs on the dissipation of energy on this level as well.
Right. Yeah, and so that's, and we have the civilization. What do you call it? The
Well, yeah, they are then build canals.
chronology of
Yeah.
spectacular.
Yeah, you build
systems.
canals. All of a sudden, you need to maintain canals. All of a sudden, you need to maintain the maintainers of the canals. All
Right,
of
like
a
you
sudden
you
need-
start in nature where you have animals and shit attacking you, so you have to build walls, right?
Mhm.
And so and things build up in plateaus, like these energy charges. Nature is just harassing the shit out of you. How can you stop all these threats and build a
Yeah. So-
stability platform?
So as you're absorbing, you restructure into a more complicated structure that can now not only absorb more, but release it further, better, as it is. So now you create a better structure. It can now handle so much more, but it solved its own problem. But because it can handle so much more, it now absorbs a shit ton more, and the cycle begins
Right.
anew on a different scale.
Right, introducing new problems too,
Yeah. So
which I'm sure you're kind of pointing to
So
there.
so the cycle of self-perpetuating problems essentially begins from that point.
Right,
So the more you solve, the more problems.
new
The more you solve, the
environment,
more your
new problems.
and so on and so forth. And so, at some point, there's got to be. So this could go, again, mathematically, it can go one of two ways, like this and crash entirely, or tapered off eventually, and perhaps fluctuate, and then hopefully,
And what are your dimensions there?
time-wise.
What is expanding apart mean?
So ideology-wise, expanding apart to the point of complete crushing down
Okay.
on the civilization.
So by coming back is basically a plateau. So you
coming
want to
back,
expand out, but-
coming back is like sort of like.
And this is the-
forming a solid structure.
This is the development of the grammar of the carrier of the plateau,
Yeah, self.
and then exploding out again using that grammar in all its or using
Yeah.
that symbol set in all of its permutations.
Yeah, but going back to the discussion of convergence, you know how like a large species converge body-wise into niches.
Right.
So
we talked about last time.
So we get repetition of evolution repeats itself in niches, in the form of body plans. So the same thing, I believe, is the trajectory of the social and development, in that eventually it has to, on the more abstract,
Okay.
as it gets more runaway and more abstract, it needs to converge on
Like,
the abstractions.
There has to be ways to communicate better, properly. And
And
those will
ultimately,
be the
that's
shape of societies that survive these
Yeah,
higher plateaus.
there's certain organs we cannot do without. There are certain physical extensions of civilization cannot
So
do
I would
without.
say a niche
and
like
that's
that.
the shape.
A niche like that is the guild, and the ability
Yes.
to do the guild.
So the guild
And
is
this
supposed
is
to
a-
capture that idea. Yeah.
This is a niche that only maybe certain things, but will provide a plateau of stability, which you will never find anywhere else in the galaxy.
Yeah.
Like, this is it.
Like breaking this up makes no sense.
All
basically.
many civilizations come up to this point and then try to do that, to do the guild, and they'll just up and down forever, maybe.
Or spread out too far and then crush.
Like if
and then
this
it all
is our
crashes.
if this is our first time on Earth coming up to this level of technological advancement and all that, maybe it comes down. Maybe we fucked it for a long time.
Historically,
But maybe it comes back up again later, and it's like, oh, 5,000
Yeah.
years ago they did all this stupid shit.
So
and
to bring it to history, for
Fukushima
instance,
and all that. Fukushima's finally done.
From historical perspective, we got Rome, right? We had Rome once upon a time. It grew, crushed itself. But Rome never died.
Right.
Rome reincarnated in
Yeah,
a
so
bunch
we
of
have a
different
reflection of
empires
that.
after the fact. The latest of which being the U.S. essentially.
Empires, though. What do we assign this at? Remember the plateaus?
Empire is the is what happens when the city states consolidate into a singular entity of organs.
Feeling like I should pull that up.
Each city-state used to be self-sufficient in terms of its provision.
Right.
Then they all sort of merge into a centralized. There will be a centralized city-state that is essentially virtual, right? And it would utilize the other city-states as its organs.
Right. And when you have a market's complex enough and a standardization of the market, then you can trade between cities, and then cities don't really matter.
Right, and then everybody gets removed from their context yet again.
Right.
Hence, it's being a new plateau.
Indeed, indeed. Not that one.
What are you looking for?
Just searching, don't mind me.
Because we've got 10 minutes.
Think so? No, we got
Ish.
like 20, 25. Unless you want to just have a little bit of a chill after.
No, we could keep going. This is a chill.
It is chill. I appreciate chilling very much. I'm looking at a whole bunch of pictures of food.
I know. I was cooking.
Cooking it.
What do you think?
Oh,
of mine?
here's what we get this with. Save that one. What did I think of?
My steak.
Oh, the pictures looked good. You had the cross hashing on there too.
Yeah, that was the.
Was it actually tender? Because I know
yeah.
flanks can be tough.
That's the thing.
Tough to get good.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I did it. The reason I did the scorching is so that the marinade can penetrate better.
Oh, get in and kind of break it up a bit.
Yeah, and also because the whole thing is like one long, big ass muscle things. When you cut it up like that, it breaks up the actual.
Damn.
All in all, it turned out real tender. Melt in your mouth. The kids.
That's amazing.
The kids freaking swallowed it whole.
Unimaginable.
Yeah, flank is definitely a tough one to cook right, and I got it right the first time.
Nice. Congrats.
And I got everyone waiting for me. Look at how excited I am.
Where? Picture?
The picture, yeah.
I know.
I'm like so animated.
I like that. Oh, it won't show up. But that thumbnail or whatever was, pretty good. And then me just sitting there like, do do do. Okay.
Captain.
Whatever is going on.
Captain Reality.
Well, it's show business, right? I like doing my poses, do 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 do.
I just try not to yawn.
Just having a good time, not yawning.
So yeah,
Sorry, I wanted to pull up that, and I think it's
I was
really
kind of
cool.
just gonna mention the fact that we are appropriating New Age terminology a little bit. I find it amusing personally. The fact that we can now say balance your energy.
If we do it properly, then
But to bring it down to a bit more of a model speaky thing,
Right.
balancing really refers to the whole balance between recognition and expression. So
I think you haven't fleshed that out completely yet.
no, because I didn't flush out the effects of recognition, the effects of expression as a means of charging up the
We haven't-
potential and dissipating.
We
it.
haven't. I don't think we've captured it
But
yet, because
Sort of
you
we
need to
did.
delineate between a foreign agent and an inner agent, because you're having this inner agent giving you instructions.
that is not a good delineation you want to make, because that could also that is arbitrary. Inner agents can do the same.
I know, and that's why I just said that. So there's a mirror, and this is the same thing happening here. How do you differentiate? Because we haven't described that. I'm
Oh, you
trying to
don't.
tell you.
So to cover that topic, okay?
Balance.
You don't
We're talking balance here. What is good balance? What is
So-
bad balance?
First of all, let's remove an assumption that you are an agent. That's not the case.
No.
At the complexity level of a whole human being, we're talking about, I don't know how many, like uncountable agents
Right.
doing this sort of interaction between themselves. Some of which could potentially be very disruptive, right? Like thought patterns and whatnot.
Sure.
Could potentially be projected into it, all that jazz. So, the
Right.
balance can be
Oh,
thought of as
I
being
got you.
fed by external entities,
got you.
but it also can be
Which
thought of as
should be
what's going on internally.
external entities should be simply scrutinized more. It doesn't mean that they're wrong
Right.
to feed you energy. Not at all.
Yeah.
As long as you are providing the feedback mechanism of what the instructions are, and you think
To
that
them
they're-
and to yourself.
and you think that, wow, I received the instructions, they seem awesome, I'm going to try them out, but you watch what happens.
Mhm.
And when it comes from a foreign agency, whatever, you have to be aware that there could be
Agendas.
Deception,
Yeah.
specifically, which is meant to be hidden.
Right. So this is when we come back to that whole resonation thing, where you have an arrow going up the stack that can also be dysmorphic and isomorphic or dysmorphic, which that is to say when that foreign agent is having you resonate with it, that action you're doing as a result of that resonation, is it beneficial or detrimental to you as the stack? The physical makeup of that stack,
Right.
Because potentially those actions that you are performing on behalf of that agent could literally be self-destructive.
Yes.
So if somebody tells
And
you,
you
for
may not even
instance-
know it.
right?
Especially if you're heavily mediated and don't understand your own
So
stack.
my go-to example is when somebody recommends to drink bleach to get rid of coronavirus. Sure, bleach may kill coronavirus in some environments,
Right.
but that environment is not inside you.
But wait, if they're your president, your commander-in-chief, then you must obey.
This comes down to a lot. This comes down to this whole balance thing, actually. Like, how much of this recognition needs to dissipate this way versus how much of it needs to
And-
be dissipated in terms of a resonation? How much of it...
And what is a completely fiat command versus like a suggestion of coherence? Like, how do you
Well, the suggestion will be fiat, but the reaction might not be.
Exactly. Like, so I'm trying to poke holes in this. Like, we haven't described this yet. Like,
Right.
this whole balance thing. No, we have only. We're
No,
just
no,
pointing
no.
at
We
it.
so far we've described the potential mechanisms for how this balance would work. One of them being the feeding of information versus the dissipation of it, and also the mechanism of word to number being the mechanism of dissipation itself. How do we get to from this to this to this? We have to connect to the correct agents to transfer it all properly. So we got to create the right structure. The right structure here
Right.
being the model.
And we can receive instructions from society which tell us, oh, you have to go and do that with this person. So you're like feeding that energy back out into another area and just trusting that that's the right process.
So the solution isn't to believe this, believe that, or believe. It's to create a kind of structure, a circuit within yourself where this information flows this way, that information flows that way, this information flows this way. It kind of gives it a no meaning and all meaning at the same time. This means that, this means that, this means that, but at the same time, none of these meanings have anything to do with some arbitrary narrative that somebody's talking about. It's got to do with these mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And
yeah, and it's interesting. So what has to enter the discussion
so the circuit
is
would be the balance.
skill for the different roles that you're either outsourcing. If you're outsourcing it to yourself, then you have less control over.
As you're talking about roles, you should be talking about those agents.
So trust. In order to trust something foreign, what they're telling you, you basically have to take that, run it as a hyperstitious object, like within yourself, see it as that, the seed pack. Is this a good seed or a bad seed? if you have the skill in the relevant domains of behavior to determine that the instructions received from outside in the world are actually seem like fine, right? You've run a number of heuristics, then you can run it. If you're taking their word for it that this is the instructions, do this, that, and that, and then it will be, everything will be fine.
You
right?
can
There's
do that,
danger
but
to that.
there's a danger to that.
And this
you
is
can
trust.
do it, and this is where you need feedback. Because you can actually, but this is where
right, to test. Whenever
this
you
is
test,
that
you have
concept
feedback.
where you're dealing with uncertainty doesn't mean you have to deal with doubt. You can still put what you feel is the correct.
To me, doubt is a stopping of the program completely.
Basically, yes. So you don't want to go that route. You don't want to do a full stop because that
Right.
that doesn't resolve the problem. It cuts off your interaction with it only. And I
Yep.
mean, we've all been there. I mean, I am myself averse to things, so it's not a holier than thou
Right.
sort of injunction.
And we've all been,
I fail at this myself.
We've all been there. Wherever we have been, we were there.
Yeah. The point isn't to say that this has to be done perfectly or not at all. In fact, I keep trying to point out that you can't ever reach that point. You have to throw something out into the ether
Yeah.
and have it give you feedback.
Yes. So you can't just mentally wrangle with an idea and say, okay, I'm not going to try it.
In other
I mean,
words,
you
you gotta
can,
run the experiment.
if you don't trust it. Yeah, but never actually implement.
So
How
if
do you know if you don't try?
So if you will, basically, we're advocating for the scientific method.
But some things you shouldn't try. So this is the antivirus.
Yeah, don't kill people.
No, this is the antivirus thing. If something comes in from the outside that you don't know if you trust them as a mediating agent service and tells you instructions, are you going to run them blindly? Right? We receive so many signals from the outside, right? That you have to run it through the antivirus thing. You don't just do the experiment just for, hey, that'll be fun. Because
Yeah.
some things have consequences, right?
Obviously, not every experiment is up for grabs.
Yeah.
In fact, what kind of experiment is up
So-
for grabs is a matter of experimentation.
There's some kind of role. There's some kind of role
But
here.
we've already done those, and we don't need to know that.
There is a service mediation role, or a client of a service mediation role,
Yeah.
where you are realizing that you are going out to the market machine to satisfy demands.
Yep.
The market's going to satisfy those, but what comes in, do you accept, do you not? So attached to this role is going to be an antivirus type role. Right? This is how you have to interact with the market, even the market of ideas and ideology of what I'm going to do with my life and this and that. Right?
Ideas are not in the marketplace. Just saying. They're
well,
not subject to the market. They're not subject to the market.
yeah. However,
Imaginary property, y'all.
they are subject to mimetic selection and replication,
Yeah.
and therefore, will you see it or not?
So biological, yes. I'm obviously going to go with the idea that ideas are biological.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Obviously, not every biological plan works out. First of all, the natural selection demonstrates quite. What do you
Of
call it?
course. Yes. It's a very
Indisputably,
good
that
example.
you cannot survive in an environment for which you are not suited.
Right. We've
So-
seen it time and time again. They just don't get it.
Fucking extinction.
Yep.
Extinction. So extinction is a real phenomenon. Like I don't think people realize that it is an actual thing.
Sure.
That it comes to things.
Yeah.
So yeah, nature certainly already provides plenty of examples of the kind of experiments that will yield very definitive results you don't need to do.
Right.
Just watch.
Yes. Let others fail.
Well, not even that. Look, you eat. There's already a lot there's already a lot to do with that you can learn from. What does that mean to the things that you eat? Right? To keep the whole idea of taking in messages to
Right.
build up energy, to have dissipation, it still works there. That is part of that process. What does that mean to all those agencies that have to be torn apart from their stacks and whatever to just be nutrients to you?
Right.
There's a lot of lessons to learn there, just on that one subject. I mean, sure, it's not the most exciting fucking thing you can think of, but
Yep.
this isn't about excitement anymore.
Well, there, yep, certain dopamine hits to be had from synchronicities and meditations.
Here, okay, I'll comment on that then. Those dopamine hits themselves are a bit of a trap, especially the ones that are coming from this model itself, because what happens, myself included, is that it's a lot easier to start thinking about this stuff than doing this stuff.
This is called the classic trap.
Yeah, and like this is the trap that I'm very much subjected to, simply of my proximity to
there's
it.
a thought like, oh, but only if my models were better, then what I end up doing would be the best.
Yeah, and
But you just sit there tweaking your models forever.
I've had this thought for so long now that I can just look back and say no, that's just not it.
But model work is work in itself.
Because I have a model. You know what? Like I'll put it out there. To me, as far as I'm concerned,
We all do.
I have the model. This is my model.
The model.
I
You
have
mean the, like capital T, the...
As far as I'm concerned, me personally, nobody else, I have the model. The model that works for me.
I'm there
right?
too.
Like let's not get ahead of ourselves and say this is the model for everybody. I don't care whether it is or not. I assume it's for enough people. But it works for me. Does that mean that I am perfectly adherent to everything I am stating? No. Fuck no. The only reason I even have half the ideas I do is because of every goddamn thing I fail at to do. Like, I look back at it,
Yeah.
like, oh, wait a minute.
Live and learn.
This doesn't match to this. Like, all I can do is basically say to myself, I made a mistake there, I made a mistake there, I made a mistake there. So this whole intellectual part of it is mainly to kick my own ass at the end of the day, not to tell people what to do.
Well, that's kind of like part of the reason why I like to drive for products, because I've recognized that a long time ago. We've recognized it a long time ago. If it doesn't amount to anything, what is it actually? Well, I mean, aside from in your life, like really, we can't argue and say that this hasn't been life-changing and paradigm-shifting for us in our lives. The work that we've done.
Well, yeah,
just,
there's certain things I
like,
cannot get myself to bring myself to do anymore. For example, for sure.
Yeah, bad things and
taking
whatever.
advantage of people is the primary concern, of course.
Yeah, so like putting something into practice, that's to me what products are about. Like this, the deck protocol and all
Well,
that.
we can assert that this conversation is a product of the adventure
Sure.
itself.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
glad
this is
for
a
the-
dissipation of the very energy that we're talking about. Like, what builds up these goddamn
right
podcasts or streams to begin with?
Recording of a moment in time.
Why do you think I sit there on Telegram going,
Because it's awesome. But do you think everybody just
give me some feedback?
sets up all their hardware and their cameras and learns how to do all this shit? No.
I mean, that's one way to do it.
Sure.
I'm just lucky.
There's many outputs.
I'm just lucky I got you, buddy.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And I you. Cheers. So I'd say that was a complete success.
Yeah, I hope there was enough content for moving forward. The universal stuff is fucking amazing to me because
Universal? What do you mean by
the
that?
polyverse stuff, right? Because all of a sudden we can use
Yeah.
the whole idea of perspective to just paint any picture at any layer for
Right.
anything.
Yeah, and that was the point all along, is that you can capture using the same basic rudimentary things, skill set.
Coming back to the idea of replication being the most fundamental way to dissipate energy in the most efficient way, the fact that we have a singular sort of core to capture every phenomena allows the one thing to replicate over and over and
Yeah.
over and over and over again,
And
which
yeah.
dissipates, ends up dissipating all of these things
Mimetic
through
fluidity.
again, if we take the word to number reduction mechanism, all of a sudden we see how it just does that same exact work that it's essentially a tautology at this point.
And we're always experiencing from the word, from the upper end, seeing it dissipate. This is hyperstation and mind mapping, and we
and
get
this
into
is and
that.
this is movement.
It's the whole package.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like it's this is why it's the model for me. Like if I were to just stay dead.
Well, great success. I think we're gonna call it at that.
I will leave it with a comment of
Final remarks.
if you ever imagine the concept of emptiness from the Buddhist parlance, how things are always codependent but never in and of themselves. This environment, or this
What we talked about today.
this polyversal environment of where it's all about like what happens to go on to a carrier, and if it doesn't go on to that carrier, it's not there. It sort of illuminates that exact same idea in a very technical fashion. And if you want to turn this around and look at it from the perspective of Buddha nature, that is the reaction to the nihilism that emptiness sort of evokes, then you get the same thing, except you just added a perspective to this, and you're just illuminating a single carrier and how that all works out, and all of a sudden you're using the exact same understanding, but now you have agency and nature and all of that involved and have full meaning. And again, you got that word versus number dichotomy right within the expression of this polyverse, where on the one hand you have meaningless symbology just working itself up into layers. On the other hand, you have agency directing top down what happens. So even there, we've captured, I believe, those ancient ideas that even were themselves reactions to one another. Emptiness was a way to disseminate the idea that nirvana is a state, for example, because it's not.
And then you're supposed to argue over the definitions.
Nirvana is basically a matter of seeing things in this way of emptiness, right? But this emptiness again gave rise to the idea of nihilism,
Right.
which gave
so Buddha
first
nature as a reaction against that. Yep.
But again,
The
with
history of so in final remarks, you wanted to give a purvey of
so it's all
Buddhist
there.
history.
It's all there. It's the same stuff. That part, I just wanted to eliminate that the personal and the impersonal, as dichotomous as they seem to be, are not. They're part and parcel of the same package. It's just where and how, which carriers are doing what are really the question, and that is basically perspective, and that is basically goes back to those older ideas of, well, this is the Buddha nature, as in this is the agency, versus this is the emptiness, so this is just a mechanism. They're not separate things, and there's no real duality between the two. It's this description actually eliminates it altogether.
And models matter.
So personal is impersonal, and impersonal is personal.
In short, in summary.
So as insignificant as we are in the universe, we are the most significant aspects of the universe at the same time.
Of course.
So
Yep.
live with that one.
If God wanted to have a thought, how would he do it? How else? It's a very ordered universe. Much love.